it's disgusting to look at, but it's absolutely beautiful. And we really tried to bring in those sort of aspects of beauty with the gore.
The Last of Us did it as well.
Yes.
The monsters are beautiful and horrible looking, but they're still pretty.
Yeah.
It's still like there's something that makes you want to look at it, but it's So I think that we didn't want to do, like Chris said, Stasis had a lot of Stasis 1 had a lot of gore for gore's sake, but we kind of wanted to make it. I mean, I'm squarish. I don't like blood and stuff like that, so I don't even.
You don't like
horror movies that so much.
you don't like you don't like blood and stuff. What?
I'm a little baby. I get scared of these horror movies and stuff. I gotta look away.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the Game Engineering Podcast. Today I am joined by Nic and Chris, who are brothers who formed the studio Brotherhood Games. They develop isometric point-and-click adventure games, and they're best well known for Stasis Bone Totem. And they tend not to market it up front, but Stasis Bone Totem is a horror. It's not like a classical horror game because you have a view from top down and you're quite detached from the characters. But the story that you're unraveling in this adventure game is horrific, and it tends to stay and linger and haunt you before you go to sleep. And we discuss how to make such stories, how to write them, and how to execute them in this podcast. And tell me a little bit about yourself.
Great. Well, we are brothers. And we have aptly named our studio the Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Took a while to think of that one. Yeah.
We have been making games full time for a decade now, and we are based in Cape Town, South Africa. So pretty far away from the rest of the world. But yeah, Chris and myself, Nic, Chris, have been working together for 20 years now. I don't know how common that is. Every time I tell people that we're brothers and we've been working together for, for more than, I suppose, more than a month, people are like, wow, how do you not kill each other? But we just have the sort of close business relationship that we've had for a very long time. And it's kind of, we'll talk a bit later, I suppose, about how we've structured that relationship from a business and a working aspect. But in the video game side of things, we have been together for 10 years now. We've released a couple of games, and hopefully we'll get to release a couple more.
Yeah.
Great. And you're working for 10 years together?
So we've been working for 20 years together professionally,
okay.
Doing games together for 10 years. So half of our working professional life was spent, we ran a 3D illustration company. And then the other half of our professional life together has been independently making computer games.
Okay. So after 10 years of working together, you kind of started making games, and then...
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Correct.
We used to sort of like before we left school. Nic and I have we've always made everything from board games, card games. We actually started making computer games back in the days of it was a program called Click and Play, which eventually became Multimedia Fusion. It was sort of like a 2D WYSIWYG editor, where we tried to make games that the engine wasn't really made to make, and we would try to actually make it happen.
I think that was 94. We started making computer games specifically, but before that, I was born in 81, Chris was born in 83, and we've fortuitously, my mom is, I suppose our mom she's a school teacher, but she taught art. She's actually a professional art. She's got
fine artist
degrees in various art disciplines, but she's a fine artist. She taught at university and at high schools and at junior schools and all that sort of thing. And a lot of she's a very good teacher. A lot of the stuff that she taught was sort of making games. You teach kids how to draw their own pictures and make their own cards. And Chris and I, at a really young age, sort of took to that. And we'd been making board games and making up our own games since we were like 6 or 7 years old. We still have some of them over here. And I think because we were taught simultaneously by my mother, we sort of had a really good working relationship from a young age. We do the activities together.
Yeah.
So,
and even, I mean, we'll obviously get into how the company is split up a little bit later, but it generally went to me with a focus on art and Nic with a focus on the technical programming side. And even when we collaborated with our stuff when we were sort of like teenagers, that generally was the split that we actually went down in. And I think we both just gravitated towards those different aspects of game design naturally. I just kept it going now for 2-3 decades.
Yeah. So the correct answer would be we've been making games for 35 years together, but professionally actually getting people to pay us money to make games for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And since these last 10 years, what kind of titles you released? Just to keep the history.
Sure. So we sort of found our niche as narrative-based games. These are things that have really interested us. Alongside making games, we've always loved film and sci-fi stories and sci-fi books and that sort of thing. So we were super sci-fi nerds in the 80s and 90s, and we've watched.
We were sci-fi nerds before being sci-fi nerds was cool.
Yes.
So
That's a thing. That's a thing to say. Like that's.
I can recall the first time we watched Star Wars. I think I was 3 or 4, and we used to go to this lady's house, and she had this bootleg VHS of the trilogy, of the original trilogy, and she used to play it for us. And I still have memories of that. Sort of not really knowing what the heck's going on, but we were sort of obsessed with it. And
Star Trek as well. We've been Star Trek fans since sort of like reruns of the original series all the way through TNG, Voyager, DS9. Like we've the original Battlestar Galactica and all the new reboots. Like we've really been immersed in sci-fi from 70s sci-fi all the way through to the current sort of era.
Chris always wanted to make movies, sort of because of our love of film and that sort of genre. I wanted to make movies, but unfortunately, where we live in South Africa, and especially at the time, sort of coming out at the end of apartheid, South Africa has quite a tumultuous history. And at the time, it was sort of quite a backwater in terms of film, and that. Although the industry now, there's quite a lot of movies made actually in Cape Town here. At the time, nothing was happening yet. Everything was locally produced stuff. So, sort of dreams of working in film were aptly crashed and crushed. But when we were sort of thinking what we will do when we leave school, the only option would be to actually you have to move to another country if you want to get involved in those industries. And I think that we just sort of found another way to tell the stories that we've always wanted to tell. And that sort of matured all the way through our working relationship all the way through to now.
Okay. And then, so you started making games, right?
Mm-hmm.
Narrative games. Were they always from like isometric, top-down camera?
So the isometric view has been something that I've just always loved. I think one of the first games where it really stood out to me was the original Fallout. Where it's the first game where I was just incredibly impressed with the isometric view. But it kind of goes back to playing sort of like Diablo and StarCraft and that. And when I set out to first make Stasis, I wanted to make something that looked like an RPG, but not something I couldn't make an RPG because I was just making the entire thing by myself. And I just kind of naturally gravitated towards that isometric view, not really thinking that it was going to become a staple of our games. It was just something that I enjoyed doing the art from that point of view. And I didn't even think at the time that was kind of a strange view for point-and-click adventure games to take. I think up until then there was, Twinsons, Odyssey, and then Sanitarium were the only two that I can really think of that were non-RPG, non-action games that had this sort of isometric view. And at the time, Nic and I, we ran an architectural design studio where we did illustrations for architects. And I got to use a lot of the same design tools and libraries and that we had for our regular day-to-day work in our games. And that's why our games tend to have a very architectural feel to them. They're very much environment-based. And that was just as a result of me having access to these tools.
We produced a lot of marketing material for property developers, and what was in vogue I don't know about now, but what was vogue at the time was to take these kind of high-level views of the apartments or the building with the roof cut off, and you could kind of see what was happening inside. Yeah. And that's I think that style Chris worked out sort of how to do those, and we produced thousands of those images, and I think that sort of also rubbed off on the on sort of the style, on the isometric style. So yeah, I think the style has just become synonymous with the kind of games we make, but I don't think it's the only kind of game that we will ever make. Definitely, I know it's not the only kind of game. So I think that sort of has
foreshadowing, everybody. It's foreshadowing.
I think I had like sort of a historical thing from the games from our youth, all the from the Crusader games, all that Fallout, etc. And it's also, I think that it was an interesting point of view to render the scenes from, because it wasn't commonly done. Obviously, like Chris said, there's not many adventure games done in isometric, not pure sort of adventure games. Lots of RPGs would use that style, but not really adventure games that were in the specific subgenre of point-and-click adventure games.
Yeah, so I think that it helped us carve out our own niche in that genre, where it was very difficult to compare our games to anybody else because there was no one really doing this sort of graphical style that we were actually doing. And I think that helped in getting us quite a loyal fan base. I'm very grateful.
It also struck a nostalgic nerve that people had on, it was easy to sell the views of the game because people sort of had this, what would you say? It was a fond nostalgia for for isometric type games, which, I mean, these days, apart from a couple of the RPGs, which aren't really even a true axonometric or isometric, it really is kind of a niche, super niche camera angles.
Yeah. And your games, I think they were featured in some video that were highlighting like isometric, current isometric camera view games, like just highlighting Stasis Bone Totem. But before we get to the Stasis Bone Totem, I'm itching to get to it. But let's do this like history with your games to understand what needed to happen in your mind to reach Stasis Bone Totem. Okay.
A lot had to happen. So we ran our other business, and our other business was very successful, and we had a lot of people who worked for us. But the industry that we were in was an extremely stressful. Not that this industry is any less stressful, but it was extremely stressful, time pressure related industry, and we were always looking for an out. How, can we sell this business? Can we do something else? And at the time, Kickstarter became a possible out or an option for independent games to get made and actually build an audience, and also test to see if there was an audience, if people were willing to pay for this kind of game. So Chris and I set an arbitrary amount of $100 and something thousand. And we're like, if this game if we can raise that kind of money on Kickstarter, then maybe we could do this as a career.
Yeah, this is a viable business if we could actually move.
Yeah. So Chris kind of, at the time, he had a small following on Stasis. People were saying, when is this game coming out? He's like, no, it's just me doing this in my spare time. I work full time, do this in the evenings and the weekends. And we were like, okay, well, if we run this Kickstarter and it's successful, Chris can possibly work on this game for 2 years. He can still come into the office. We actually moved the offices through to our house and built an extension of our house, so our staff could come to our house and work there. Chris could come in the evenings and do his work on the stuff. I would run the office during the day. It was a very stressful time, but we managed to keep our work going, and Chris managed to complete the game. And the Kickstarter was quite successful. The game was released and was quite successful, and that sort of set this chain reaction of multiple games in a similar genre. So
what was the year of the release?
It came out in 2015.
The Kickstarter was in 2013.
Yeah.
So it was 2 years of full-time production. And pre that, I'd been working on it in my spare time for about maybe 3 or 4 years or so. But very much, the game was kind of like 10% done by the time I got to the Kickstarter. And then the Kickstarter really sort of like the vast bulk of production happened in that 2-year time period.
Yeah, we released a demo on Kickstarter, and the demo got like hundreds of thousands of downloads. So we're like, okay, well, people really want to play this game.
It was actually quite serendipitous because we had a launch date we were going to go on the Kickstarter, but we didn't know. I don't know what Kickstarter is like nowadays, but basically they have to sort of like review your campaign, and they were pushing the date further and further along. And we kind of had this extra 2-week time period. And I said to Nic, like, let's see if we can get this little first part of the game polished up enough to release it as a demo. And thankfully we did. And I think that was one of the large driving forces in our Kickstarter being funded. There were a lot of games at the time that were sort of being sold as a dream. And this was a game, I think it stood out because it actually had a fully playable piece of the game and that people could buy into it when we actually pushed it forward.
The industry was very different at the time. I mean, this was like pre-screen Steam Greenlight. Greenlight had just come out. So you couldn't actually get onto Steam. You literally had to be invited onto Steam.
Yeah.
So self-publishing was, when we first went in and we were prepping the Kickstarter, it was like a case of, okay, well, we'll have to publish this and all the tools to distribute the game ourselves and that sort of thing.
If we don't get onto Steam, we'll have to find another way to actually get the game out to people. It was quite a stressful but exciting time.
But obviously Greenlight came out and then they did away with that. Now you just pay a fee to hop on there. But the market was very different at the time. You also had the way you actually, we'll maybe talk about that a bit later, but the way you actually market games is very different as well.
Yeah.
So then after Stasis we kind of said, okay, well, we'll close our other business and we will then move our offices. We'll then try and produce another game and run another Kickstarter. And we then took a year to produce our next game and we released it for free actually, which is Cayne, which is just sort of a small little play experience in the Stasis universe. But why Cayne was an important game is it was a game that Chris and I jointly worked on. I mean, Stasis, Chris did by himself. I didn't have nothing to do with it. A lot of people talk about like the games that are one-man army, maybe not as because Chris did have someone do the music, so it wouldn't be as extreme as Stardew Valley or whatever. But Chris pretty much did everything else himself. He did the art, the programming, the sound effects, everything was himself. He just didn't do the music and some of the voices.
Yeah.
And so we outsourced some of the creative writing.
I did do all of the voices in my very, very first iteration of the game, and that's actually one of the reasons. So in adventure games, usually you go and you click on an object and the protagonist talks about the object, and we sort of have a gameplay mechanic of you mouse over the object and the little description comes up. And that literally came about because I was like, I'm going to have to voice act this entire game. I'm a terrible voice actor. How can I do as little voice acting as possible? And that's like, we made the mechanic because I didn't want to have voice acting in the game. And that's sort of like been following in all of our games, has taken that same mechanic.
I didn't realize that Chris, you made the whole Stasis. I didn't realize this.
Yeah, it was a stupid amount of work, and I don't know if I would do it again. But I think that you have the naivety to think that you can do it, so you sort of do. And I think when it finished, I was like, I can't believe I actually did that. I actually recently opened up the original Visionaire file, and I was looking through it, and I was having these sort of waves of nostalgia. And I remember sitting in my tiny office with my cats on my lap until 3:00 in the morning every day, just sort of working on it and plodding along at it. And yeah, it was an insane amount of work, but ultimately very satisfying.
How much time have you slept for during this time?
We pretty much keep the similar work hours now.
Like making Stasis or making Stasis the first Stasis.
Yeah, I used to work it for about 9:30 till sometime in the evening, so probably at 5 or 6 o'clock. Then I'd go over to the office and I would do whatever work I needed to do there. That was usually about 2 hours or so. And then I'd go back to my home office and carry working there until past 12, and then sleep, and then do the exact same thing again. I did that for 2 years.
Yeah, I think crunch is not necessarily. You can do crunch in a good way. You don't have to necessarily work. People become very inefficient after working long periods of time. So we sort of take the approach, and we still do it with our games now. Is that we'll start work at like, I'm not going to start work at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m., but we'll start at 9:30, and then we'll go hard on the work until like 5 o'clock. So if we can get like 8 hours of really good work in, I consider that really good. Yeah. And then if you need to come back, you take a break, then you come back. We would never sit for 20 hours and do it. You're not producing anything of value.
Yeah.
And then
I think there's also a difference with us in that because it's our game, we get the 100% benefits of the work that we actually put in. I would never have an employee and expect them to do crunch. In fact, when we ran our studio, we had very limited overtime. Overtime was always very well paid and always voluntary.
And always you very have a day off as well.
Yeah,
So we work today over, you got a day off.
Yes, yeah,
very fair.
We've always been very, because we wanted to create a company that we would want to actually work at. So we were always very fair with that. But when it comes to I've got a bit of a blind spot with our own work. We're like, I'll push forward for 17, 18 hours. But I was much younger then. I'm in my 40s now, very early 40s. I'm 40. I can still say late 30s maybe. But yeah, and I don't have, I can't do what I used to actually do. I can't do these 17-hour work days and that. And it's just not healthy. It's not mentally healthy. I think that I can push it, but I can't.
Okay. So Stasis, then Cayne as a free game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you started to allude to, like the Cayne was a sort of what purpose did the Cayne?
So Cayne, we use Cayne as a marketing tool for our next game. But the primary, I'll elaborate on that in a moment. But the primary function of Cayne was to see how Chris and I could work together on a game project, on a professional game project.
Yeah. Full time.
Yeah. So we were like, okay, Nic, what roles will Nic take? Nic will do, I've been programming for 30 years. I did wrote a lot of business software.
All of our software to run our business, all of our staff management tools, and that were all built by Nic.
Yeah. So I used to write business software, and I've been making silly little games on the side. And so I sort of thought, okay, I can tackle this. I remember putting up Unity. It was Unity 2, version 2. And then when I really started using Unity, it was Unity version 3. And I was blown away by this tool, how it was leagues ahead of the other, of like the Game Maker and all the other various tools that were out there, because you could actually program in C#. They had Unity script at the time, which I used because I did a lot of stuff in ActionScript, so it was very easy for me to use Unity script. But then C# was easy language as well for me to transition over to. So I found the tools really easy, but finding them easy on a hobbyist level, but working full time on a project is very different. So Chris and I were like, okay, if we can afford to take a year to see how we would actually build this project, we gave ourselves a year to make a game. Any longer than that, we were going to start burning through money we didn't have. So we're like, okay, we'll build a game, we'll release it for free in conjunction with another crowdfunding campaign, and hopefully we can drive enough interest in that into a new game that we will then spend at the time it was 2 years on to develop another game. But the game will be utilizing the engine that we build in Cayne in Unity. So we won't be throwing away anything. We'll use the same interface, the same graphic systems, etc., save game systems, whatever the case may be.
So it was very much a year of essentially prototyping, research and development with the idea of completing a project. Because the most difficult part of a game is sort of like the first 90%, and the second most difficult is the last 90%. And there's always that sort of thing. It's like you can do something, but to actually finish a game and publish it, all the small things that you don't actually think of, we needed to be confident that we could actually do that, and we could work together without actually killing each other on like a single creative goal, which I think is quite difficult to be unified like that.
Most of our previous projects for client work, was a month max. Most of it was 2-3 weeks. So to work solely on a project for a year at the time, now it's timelines are 3 years on a project.
Yeah.
We started smaller, a year. It's difficult. It's not easy to concentrate full time on one project and not hate it after a year. It was so Cayne was sort of a trial for us. A lot of people were actually shocked that we released it for free. They were like, they would have paid for it. And we do have some DLC, and the DLC is actually sold really well. So a lot of people actually bought the DLC to show support. But Cayne still gets downloaded, and we still see it as a conduit into our other games. People play the free game and then swing over to our other games. And I think that the success of our other games are directly related to the fact that Cayne is out there, because Cayne has like 1 million downloads. It's done really well. So a lot of people and people play it every day. So
it's not our best game, but it's probably one of our more important ones that we actually made.
In what way?
Our relationship.
In this way. Okay.
And how it sort of has sculpted what we've actually done as.
It also was an experiment on taking the which is the kind of things we wanted to do. We didn't want to sequel bait and have another Stasis game. Stasis 2. We were like, oh gosh, we've already spent all this time. Chris had already spent like 6 years in the Stasis
universe.
John Narachek was 6 years. He was like, oh, do I want to spend another 3 years building another game? We're like, no, okay. Let's make a game that's kind of in the anthology of the Stasis universe. So not the same protagonist, but sort of set against the same backdrop. And we'll just carry on elaborating on the lore of the universe. And we'll visit the Stasis universe, but through a different character's eyes in a different story. Yeah. And that's kind of which followed through on Totem as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. Yeah. But Stasis was the protogenitor for our next game. Cayne was our protogenitor for our next game, which was Beautiful Desolation. We kind of went off on a wild tangent after Cayne. We were like, okay, maybe we can add a few more RPG-like type elements to this game, and maybe make it like a little bit more divert a little bit more away from the traditional point-and-click genre, and go sort of into a bit more of an open world, but still point-and-click, but like a bit more open, where it was a bit more reminiscent of our childhood games like Star Control 2, where you can kind of go anywhere, but it's still an adventure game. It's still a fixed narrative, but the world is kind of your oyster and you can travel anywhere. And that's kind of the direction we went with Beautiful Desolation. Do you want to talk a bit about BD?
Yeah, well, unless there's anything you want to do, are there any questions on our diatribe on Cayne?
Well, what? I did not get that.
Do you have any questions on our Cayne?
No. I think I get that. Like you made a Cayne, which is, by the way, I think it's quite incredible. Like you made a Cayne, and then you made pretty much like an engine and all of the foundations that you would need for a full game, but you didn't spend a lot of time that you would have to for the production part. So that you kind of made this base show, look, this is what we can do.
Yes.
And then seeing that the demo actually is popular and is being downloaded, and you have this like validated idea and prepared yourself the foundations. I think this is really cool, like from the strategy point of view in terms of running a studio and building games. It's super cool.
And that there was also so we used a lot of the framework that we built on Cayne to move over to Beautiful Desolation, and even Bone Totem.
Yeah, Bone Totem was fully made some Beautiful Desolation.
Built on Beautiful Desolation. So all of our games have been. So as I said, like Cayne, I don't know if it's our best game, but it's definitely one of the most important games.
We also learned a lot. Like we iterated on the interface for things that we learned on Stasis 1, and we refined in Cayne, and then we further refined Beautiful Desolation, and then further refined by Totem. So I think by Totem is kind of it's got a very slick interface, especially for the complexity of the game. We'll talk about it in a moment. It's not just a traditional drag items around. There is a lot of complexity happening in that that's kind of hidden from the user. And I think that we sort of like a common trope in the indie. I suppose it doesn't really in AAA. They don't do it. AAA tends to kind of they kind of build an engine and kind of churn out lots of games on that engine, just making it look better every time and adding more content. Whereas indies kind of have this. I believe it's a misnomer of throwing away what they've done and starting again every time. The truth is we have to be, because we're indie and we don't have that enormous backing, we have to be as optimal as possible in reusing the technology as much as possible. There's no shame in reusing stuff you've done already. There's what's it, guys? The guy from Jeff Vogel from Spiderweb Software, who's been making RPGs since like the early 90s, late 80s.
Shareware sort of
the shareware market. I mean, he's been doing it. I think his current engine, he's been using the same engine for like 30 years. But he's
same sprites for 30 years as well.
Yeah, he updates them occasionally, but he sort of he kind of understands that you don't if you don't finish a project and you haven't got that project out there, it's absolutely useless. And so we have to really build on whatever we've got to try and make the project happen, especially when you're talking about your second, third, fourth project. So we kind of kept that in mind, and we have up until our current project, we have kept that in mind. And Bo Totem was kind of a result of that thought process.
Okay. It's also like there's a trap for new engineers to kind of fall in love with like the tools, but not the making the stuff process. Like kind of, oh, this is the new editor, or maybe like NeoVim, whatever, like something like that. And like spending a lot of time, majority of the time, to improving like code abstractions or whatever from the engineering point of view, instead of thinking like, okay, I need to make this game. What can I do to make this as fast as possible? Because like my time is my money, money is my work. Like it's everything pretty much proportional. So like, what can I do to leverage what all I have already built? What tools are at my disposal to actually get this stuff as soon as possible out there? This is really
and with the rapid advancement of tools, I mean, it's actually quite it's quite astounding. I mean, our latest game, we'll talk about it later, but we moved it into Unreal, and we're literally using the same tools that they're using to make $100 million games. We're using the same tools that they're using. But we have to be quite realistic about it. I mean, I think that indie developers, especially when they're using things like Unreal, are often distracted by sort of that shiny object mentality of, I'm going to use all the latest cutting edge stuff that there is there, and I'm going to go and spend all the time and research, like you said, the effort to go and get that and invest in the game. I often don't think that that's servicing the game that they're trying to build.
Also, what can happen is that it's a very difficult thing, and it's something that we sort of do deal with in making our games. Is that you don't want to lose the essence of why you started to make that game, because games take a very long time to make. I joked on Twitter once. I think I said that games just take 3 years. It doesn't matter what the game is, it will just take 3 years at least. There is no way to make a shorter game, other than apparently us with Cayne. But like games nowadays, they just take a very long time. And to focus on one project for 3 years and still keep the core of what you're trying to actually do in that entire time period. Because like making games is a lot of fun, but it's also, there's a lot of downtime. It's like 10% fun and it's 90% just like grunt work that you're doing to try to capture that 10% of fun. And I think that when the new technology starts to come in, you can very easily drift away from,
get distracted because 90% is the hard stuff, and you get distracted and you want to kind of play with the new stuff. And
nobody wants to deal with Excel spreadsheets and CMS tables and how you save game data is moved around. People, you want like nanite, and you want the new, sort of look at the way that the PCG graphs work and that, but that's not going to make your game fun. if it's starting to move away from the core, what your initial game idea is. And that's something we do struggle with it. And we document a lot of things. We always have multiple Google Docs where we try to outline the pillars of our games, and we constantly refer back to them as to what are we trying to actually make. And there are times, Beautiful Desolation is actually a very good example of that, where we do sometimes lose what we want the game to actually be. And we lose a bit of the confidence that we have in our initial ideas and choices and that. And we try to, well, what if we experiment with this, and what if we do that? And that can lose the voice of the game.
Yeah, so Beautiful Desolation, it came out after Cayne. We ran a Kickstarter, and that came out. And we, like I said earlier, we tried to introduce some other elements into the genre. And I think the game suffered for it. A lot of people love it. A lot of people hate it. But I think that if we had just kind of stuck to a bit more of a traditional point-and-click game, it would have been as successful as Bone Totem has been. I mean, Bone Totem was far surpassed in sales and reviews and accolades a Beautiful Desolation, because I think we kind of stuck to what we knew people wanted, and what we knew we could produce, and maybe also more along the lines of what we promised in the Kickstarter. I think we just got a bit distracted, and we kind of produced a game that people didn't necessarily understand or want. So,
Yes.
Like
it's still a good game. It's still a very good game. It's very cool. But it's kind of, I think it might be, I think if it was released in 2000 or like 90s, it would have been a cult classic. But for the modern day, I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. People don't like games that are like 20 hours and they feel lost and have to wander around and they don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
Whereas
those are the kind of games that we really like.
Yeah,
but they're not the kinds of games that I think necessarily modern adventure gamers will like. And the game, it wasn't RPG enough for RPG users, and it wasn't adventure game enough for adventure game users. And our thought was that we'll take some of the RPG audience into adventure games and some of the adventure into RPGs. But what happened was that we just got sort of like that little tiny overlap of people that like adventure games and RPGs.
Yeah.
And that we wanted the other side of the Venn diagram, not the little split in the middle. But it was, we learned a lot, and especially in setting up narrative. Beautiful Desolation, the way that narrative was set up was very, very similar to the way that we set up the three different protagonists in Bone Totem, and how we actually worked out just how that story will actually work.
And was it also like for you to experiment what would you like to make? Because like if you add more like RPG elements, you also change a lot of the stuff that you do on a daily basis from like the core point and click stuff. So was this also like an experiment for you? Maybe we would like to move towards the RPG stuff, or
I think so. I think we've always loved RPGs, so we kind of always steer. And again, our art style kind of lends itself to the RPG kind of genre. So we kind of wanted to maybe steer our games in that direction. But I think that we were unsuccessful in that we didn't commit to it because we didn't want to isolate our adventure game fans, and our adventure game fans I don't think particularly liked. We didn't make it optional, like, so we have like an arena system with like stats and that where you can fight. You don't have to do it in the game, but I think that
I think it was important for us to do those experiments and to go into that direction. Almost, kind of knowing what doesn't work can be as important as knowing what does work. And it wasn't a complete 100% departure from our stuff. So we still took a lot of the lessons and the tools and everything we learned in our previous game. I think sort of our general feel would probably be sort of like take 70% of the game that you've made and change 30% into the new game. And for Beautiful Desolation, we took 30% of our previous game and changed 70% of it. And I think we overcorrected. It's still a game. I'm very, very proud of Beautiful Desolation. It's a game. It's a very personal game to us. There's even like the environments. We actually photo scanned areas around where we actually live, and put those photo scans into the environments. It's obviously a story about two brothers. It deals with a lot of back history of South Africa and sort of like a lot of forward-thinking, cool ideas that we have with science fiction. It's very weird, which is the kind of thing that we love. So I think the world and the world building, I think, is exceptional. I just think that the gameplay departed a bit too much from what we were comfortable producing and what our audience expected from us. And then I think we ended up, instead of sort of making the most impressive open world adventure game, we ended up making the least impressive RPG. That was not necessarily a direction that you want to actually go in. But if it wasn't for Beautiful Desolation, Bone Totem, actually exists.
A lot of the DNA in Bone Totem, which has been very well received, can be felt in Beautiful Desolation. We just kind of we kind of corrected back to sort of the adventure game side of things, and the changes we introduced to the genre were less radical, and a little we kind of made the well. I suppose we'll talk about it just now about how we did, but we learned a lot of lessons that we then applied to the next game. But that being said, Beautiful Desolation was still well received. People still enjoyed playing it. And
we didn't lose any money on it, which is always a good thing. And it helped fund.
It paid for itself and paid for the next game.
Which is kind of what you can hope for as game developers.
We weren't destitute and had to go back to making brochures and property animations for people in Dubai. It didn't happen. So
Okay. Well, then, after Beautiful Desolation, what happened?
So Beautiful Desolation had the fortuitous, as it was a difficult game to make, and then fortuitously we released it in March 2020 when COVID started. So it was a bit of a difficult one. Although sales, I think, were good because everyone was at home, so the game did sell very well because of that. But it was a difficult time. COVID was a horrible time, as I'm sure for everyone. And a lot of death, and it's like a stain on my memory. I think it makes me upset just to think about it. It was a terrible time. Fortunately for Chris and myself, when Cayne came out, Chris had already moved just down the road from me, and we were already starting to work remotely. So Beautiful Desolation and Cayne, and Stasis as well. I was in very close proximity to Chris.
We worked in the same office, literally back to back.
Yeah.
We achieved the entire production period.
So COVID kind of solidified the fact that, listen, we weren't allowed to travel. We literally had police and army in the streets in South Africa there was a period of about 4 to 6 months. You weren't allowed out of your house. It was a terrible time. You weren't allowed to go and visit anybody, and we were sort of under lock and key. And we weren't able to work together. We literally lived in 2 different places. So we were like, okay, well, we'll work on our next game remotely. And I think that kind of has then followed through to our current. We were like, okay, well, we don't necessarily have to be in the same office. We can be far away from each other. We just will have to be in constant communication of a voice chat. But we can actually build a game without us being there. It's just a new set of disciplines to learn. When you're in an office with someone, it's a lot easier to work because that other person holds you accountable to the time you get into the office, to the time you leave. Even though it's our own company and we're independent, when there's someone there that's waiting for you, you kind of a little bit more beholden to them.
It's like having a gym buddy. If you want to sort of like take gym seriously, you have to find someone you're going to work out with. So if you get those days when I just don't feel like doing it, you don't have that choice. And we'd worked in an office at that point our entire professional lives. So moving to a remote setup was difficult. But the things that Nic and I, we've always communicated very well with each other. And a lot of we just sort of transitioned the way that we did our meetings and everything over to a digital format. And it meant that we had to do a lot more documentation, but I like documentation. I like spreadsheets. I like my Google Docs. I like my meeting notes and the rest of it. And Bone Totem was built entirely remotely. It was a 100% remote production. And it also opened us up to being able to work effectively with freelancers and other contract workers, because they could slide very well into the current way that we do things anyway.
Yeah.
So we would produce our own documentation, and then we want to work with somebody else. We have 2 years of documentation, of story notes, of narrative to actually inform them on what we're actually doing, and that definitely helps in the production side.
Okay, maybe now is a good time to also do like an overview of how Stasis Bone Totem looks like. So that's like then we'll delve into more details and how some of the things were developed. So, but then we already have like this overall picture. So
Cue the footage. No. So Stasis Bone Totem is an isometric adventure gaming game. Our forte, it's 2D rendered backgrounds with 3D characters. Taking everything that we'd learned before, but instead of working with sort of lower resolution images, we thought, okay, well, we're going to make really big scenes, and we're going to make this game play at native 4K, which is difficult in a 2D heavy game. 2D games generally are quite resource intensive. I'll talk a bit later about that, but. So we were like, okay, well, we'll have big scenes that the players can move around. We'll take everything that we've learned from the previous games, but just make it better and more polished than that. And we'll set it. We thought, okay, we're going to call it Stasis Bone Totem because we want to tell another Stasis story like we did with Cayne, but we don't want to carry on the first Stasis story. We want to keep it in the same universe, but we sort of have this idea, and we're like, okay, how can we adapt this cool idea to the Stasis universe, the Stasis narrative compilation.
Yeah, and also trying to figure out what lessons we could take from Beautiful Desolation and roll into our next game. And the thing that I found the easiest with Beautiful Desolation when it came to writing the story was having 3 characters in a story. And the minute when you have 2 people, it can be quite difficult to sort of figure out where you're going to get conflict in those relationships. But the minute you add a 3rd person in, that conflict becomes very, very easy to actually write around. So we were originally going to work on another small project, which we called Goldilocks, which was a space exploration game. And we actually did a prototype for it. Nic wasn't feeding the prototype at one point, and
I thought we were falling down the same trap that we had with Beautiful Desolation, is making a game that people don't want.
Yes.
And I think that
game that we want, but other people won't.
I think it's important for indie developers specifically, because you're making your own games, you have to make games that you want to play, but you also have to make games other people want to play. Yeah. So I think that we kind of said, well, let's go back to what we know. We'll make a game that's almost a direct sequel to Stasis, telling a different story, but people who've played Stasis 1 can jump right into this game, and people who've played this game can jump right into Stasis.
And it just happened to be that independently of Nic deciding to pivot away from Goldilocks, I'd played around with this idea that I had for a game where these people sort of like, I was very into shark movies at the time, and there was the sequel to the shark movie, I think it's called 48 Meters Down or something. And one was 48 Meters Down, Uncaged, where these divers essentially are swimming around in this like Peruvian temple. And I really liked that idea. And at the time, I'd done some research into a cave system in Romania called the Mobile cave system. And it just had, I'll sort of duck into that story side, but there was something about that idea of this unexplored cave system and multiple protagonists inside it. And I built a super janky prototype using Visionaire, which was the software that I used to create the first Stasis. And Nic said to me, he thinks we should do something else. And I was like, well, I just happen to have this prototype.
He does that every time. That he pulls out, it's like, this could be a cool game.
So ironically, it also happened in our current project that we actually have. And I was like, well, I think I spent about 2 weeks working on it, just sort of like after hours, whatever after hours are for us. And I sent Nic the screenshots, and he was like, okay, we'll do that. So literally in a day, we pivoted from doing Goldilocks to, at the time, we just called it Stasis 2. And the idea was very much to say, what did we learn from Beautiful Desolation? How could we actually apply that to a game? And almost more importantly, what did we know what not to do? And how can we don't want to fall into the same traps again. So it was, how can we take essentially Stasis and Cayne, take the best of those, take the best of Beautiful Desolation, and turn it into Bone Totem. The big thing was having those three protagonists was the core to our game design.
We talked a little bit about like how Bone Totem looks like in terms of mechanics, like it's point and click. But in terms of film, how would you classify this as a genre? In terms of
so I think if Stasis one was kind of akin to Aliens or Alien, I think that if I say in terms of film, I would say this is Bone Totem's more Alien crossed with Indiana Jones. We wanted to create like a swashbuckling Indiana Jones type adventure, reminiscent of the earlier point and click Indiana Jones games, but also sort of get that sense of adventure going into like a underground temple, and fighting with the creatures and solving ancient mysteries, and that kind of swashbuckling adventure.
I wanted that part where like you turn the sundial and you can hear the rock turning, and then it triggers off something, and the spikes come out, and they've got a skeleton still attached to them. And how do we take that? And in fact, initially, the idea wasn't necessarily to set it in the Stasis universe. Nic said, if we're going to do this, we'll use Stasis. And then it became a more science fiction version of the original story that I had, which was much more grounded, people going in, almost like a set in like modern time era. And Nic sort of said, no, we do this over here, merge it into Stasis, and we can bring in the sci-fi horror aspects of the first Stasis and of movies like Alien, and then sort of combine it with a Lovecraftian, at the Mountains of Madness sort of feel to it, with this Indiana Jones mix put in there. And ironically, at the time, I was very much into my Western horrors, or horror Westerns, and I just watched Bone Tomahawk, and then I went and I read all of the Craig S. Zahler screenplays and his books, and that's what gave the name Bone Totem. Was I just really fell in love with the rawness and the violence in Bone Tomahawk, and tried to bring some of that almost like fairy tale way that he sets up his stories with the raw violence of a Western into the game. So it's a mix of a lot of stuff crammed into one story.
Okay, so we can maybe talk about the narrative more closely, right? You said that the prototype started with kind of like the pyramid, the cave system that were done below, but before that there's also like the ship, and then the descent, and like and on the other hand you had this universe that you were developing for the multiple games now, and still trying to make a game, I presume, that anybody who would come not playing other games would still understand. So how did this turn out?
I think that's important when producing a sequel. You don't want to isolate new fans to the game. And that really was a question. That's an excellent question that you asked there. Chris and I were like, will people have to have played Stasis 1 to actually enjoy Stasis 2? We were quite specific about that, even in all of our marketing material, that it's a new story. So we kind of emphasized that in the sales pitch, that it was a new story. But we do think that people who've played Stasis 1 previous, and Cayne previous to this, will even have a better experience, because they'll kind of get a lot of the back history and back lore. But the way we approach the story, we were like, okay, it's something that's important for us when we're telling a narrative, is for the characters that are involved in the story not to know more about the story than the player does. So for the most part, the characters, at least initially, going into the story, know about the world and the story as much as the player who's controlling that protagonist. So if you're writing a story and the protagonist, and you're making an adventure game, it's easier with film, because you can kind of visually tell a lot of that backstory. But with video games, it's a lot harder. So you want your protagonist to have and learn about the world as the player learns about the world. So there's that common trope of extraordinary things happening to ordinary people, and we thought if we take the story from that point of view, that these this husband and wife couple stumble upon this oil rig in the middle of the ocean that shouldn't be there, we can then discover the story along with them. They don't need to know any of the backstory of Cayne. We'll tell the backstory briefly through bits of their dialogue, and they will be and make the player aware of it. And players who played Stasis will go, aha, yes, I know what they're kind of talking about, but we won't make it pivotal to understanding the story.
I also think an important thing was the fact that we did do a visual genre shift. So I think if Bone Totem had also taken place on a spaceship, very much the way that Stasis actually did, I think that it would have been a more difficult thing to sell if this is a completely new story. So it just sort of felt like echoes of it. So we tried to change the tile set, the background that we told the story on. And also we lean very, very heavily on tropes. I love dystopian fiction. I love Blade Runner. I love sort of like Weyland Yutani and all of the really cool Tyrell Corporation and those sort of like dystopian mega corporations. And when you use tropes, if you use them effectively, they're not bad. They can be used to fill in a lot of backstory that people will naturally be able to actually go. So you have a corporation, it's a bigger corporation, in a science fiction, people go, okay, they're very clearly an evil company. Nobody's made a bigger corporation in a science fiction thing where like they're very altruistic. Yeah, the automatic assumption is evil company doing evil things.
Yeah, so we didn't need to go and tell a huge backstory of Cayne, although we have a backstory written. We have like huge timelines and some of that's explored in the previous games. We didn't necessarily need to shove that down the player's throat. Like, an RPG would kind of elaborate on that immediately.
Yeah.
We were trying to rather tell sort of this interactive story where
instead of having big lore dumps, we just relied on tropes to be able to fill in a lot of the lore that people would actually have. And the truth is that people will usually make up more interesting stories than we could actually tell. So if we give 3 points in a 10-point system, they'll add in those other points themselves. We can be as vague as we want, as long as we hit those tropes. People will fill in the blanks themselves. And then if we specifically want to fill in those blanks, we've got the PDAs, we've got dialogue. Yeah. But we didn't want to have big exposition dumps. We didn't want to have big lore dumps. So we relied on tropes and relied on a setting change to be able to say this is an entirely new story that we're telling in this trope-filled universe that we've actually been exploring.
Yeah, I think you've made like an incredible job, and the Stasis Bone Totem could be like a premier example how to tell the story from the like world building perspective, where you're just throwing a little bit like the nuggets to get the vibe, and then you have like there are places with the PDAs where you can go like full every word and have better understanding. But even with PDAs, it's not like you get thousands of pages where you need to like understand when Cayne Corporation was built in this year and since then, like it's not
yes,
it's but the world building in this game is like incredible. And now when you said this, that like the characters learn with you as a player. Now now I start to see this. I didn't realize this before, that a lot of the stuff was being learned with the characters. But the world building in this game is wow, incredible, really.
Thank you.
It's great. And in terms of like still the genre, how would you classify the horror aspects? Would you go for like for me the game was very like I ended up watching the gameplay because it would be too much for me. So how would you describe the goriness and like the horror aspects? How does it feel for you when you're making the game?
When the first Stasis was in a way I felt was sort of like Gore for Gore's sake. I was quite young when I actually did it, and I just wanted to sort of make something as as gross as possible. That's why I've got parts where like you do spinal surgery on yourself, and you find somebody fused to a tree, and then when we did Beautiful Desolation, I found that I more enjoyed sort of like subtle, disturbing gore. So we've got a race in Beautiful Desolation called the Tribulationists, and they're essentially cyborgs that have their skin removed. There's something very disturbing about that. And then when we went into Bone Totem, I think I described it as beautiful horror was what I wanted to do, like beautiful gore. The gore had to have a sense of artistry to it.
It couldn't just be gore for gore's sake. And I think that sometimes, horror is kind of devolved these days into like multiple jump scares and really horrible, gory, messy scenes. And I don't know if that really scares or resonates with people anymore. They might look away, but that doesn't really do anything for their...
It's not going to stick in your mind for the next, 2 or 3 weeks.
So when we're like, how can we create imagery and experiences that will resonate with people, that'll actually mean something to them? So the gore in Bone Totem was actually quite sparse as compared to Stasis. But when it does happen, it is quite visceral, because also we don't just have like so for instance, in the first part of the game, there's a guy who's been just saying this sounds really gross, but he's been skinned. So he's like a skinned guy, and he's got these flowers placed in his eye sockets. And then over there is a horrible image. But if you read his diary that is lying next to him, you can kind of humanize that character a little more, and that then gory image actually means more to you than if it is just some random image that you saw.
And then it was also sort of like take his skin and then little carvings, little intricate notes inside his actual skin. So the gore became almost like an art piece. And there's actually the Alex Garland movie Annihilation was a really big influence. That the gore in that movie, there's this incredible part where this person's been fused with like mushrooms, and they're kind of like splayed out on the wall, and it's disgusting to look at, but it's absolutely beautiful. And we really tried to bring in those sort of aspects of beauty with the gore.
The Last of Us did it as well.
Yes.
The monsters are beautiful and horrible looking, but they're still pretty. It's still like there's something that makes you want to look at it, but it's So I think that we didn't want to do, like Chris said, Stasis 1 had a lot of gore for gore's sake, but we kind of wanted to make it. I'm squarish. I don't like blood and stuff like that, so I don't even.
You don't like
horror movies that so much.
You don't like blood and stuff. What?
I'm a little baby. I get scared of these horror movies and stuff. I gotta look away. The scariest movie I've ever watched is what's it? Paranormal Activity. That scared the hell out of me. I can't take those psychological. Mainly that movie scared me because I've got a really active imagination, and I kind of
filled in the blanks.
You fill in the blanks over there. So we kind of tried to do that as well. Like Chris said earlier, with the narrative, we tried to just fill in the blanks. But with the gore and stuff and the horror aspects of the game, we've also tried to fill in the blanks. We didn't overtly say what had happened here, but we gave kind of hints to what had happened in certain areas, and then we have kind of a visual representation of what happened there. But we don't go to extreme gross detail with videos or whatever. We just kind of try and play on the player's mind of what could happen there.
The really funny thing is, as you're saying this, I'm sort of going through the list in my head of the gory moments in Bone Totem, and we've got sort of like the shark that gets thawed out, that stomach is still pumping, and it's like, who thought of that?
Well,
Sick bastard.
I really I love horror. I don't like real world horror. Like there's movies like The Strangers and those sort of like home invasion movies that I don't like that. I like my cosmic horror. I like my super weird horror. I like my science fiction horror. But for me, the important part of every horrific moment was it had to have a character attached to it to give it a bit of depth. It can't just be like random blood spatter against the wall. And there has to be something that happened before and that led to the horrific moment. So, for example, the guy there's a part where a surgical robot has basically been constantly doing the same surgery on one body for, several days, probably a couple of months at that point. And there was just something very disturbing about the idea of having this robot just in this single loop, just mulching away at a person.
Another thing was like another horror sort of element was there's this one passage that you come to that Mac actually finds, and there's like all these suitcases of the people, and there's like a little bit of blood on some of them. There's like all these empty suitcases, and you kind of wonder, what were they? Why were there's bullet holes in the wall as well?
Yeah.
So we don't have to literally show dead people that, but we can kind of once again
half the story behind how it got there.
Harp on those little story moments where like the player's imagination is always going to be worse than anything we can pick up.
Yeah.
So,
I can
just prompt them in a direction.
I can give an example like the suitcases. I'm from Krakow, which is not that far from Auschwitz.
Yes.
And when you visit the museum, you have a lot of places in the museum and you have like things that belong to people and you know what happened to them and you see the rest. So like when you see such an image, it makes such a visceral reaction,
Yes.
So like a less experienced person would have a video of what happened to them, but we're like, I suppose also our budget plays into it as well. We have to kind of work with what we've got, which is not a lot. So we've got to kind of say, okay, well, we've got a week to do this whole area. What can we do? We can't do an FMV video here. We've got to just kind of keep it really simple. What can we do to kind of will evoke the emotion that needs to be reached at this area? We'll look at things like the color palettes. We'll look at things like what dialogue is spoken here. In that particular scene, there's a subtle radio playing with people's voices in the background. We try to be as clever as possible.
Yeah.
Where I think that if it was like, if it was a Marvel movie, they literally would have shown people being shot with their luggage.
Yes, but
I don't think it would have had the same impact, if that makes sense.
Exactly, like the in the Marvel movie, you would see like death on the screen and it would be like kind of random people, so like nobody would care.
Yes,
kind of like Star Wars at some point, like you should like thousands of clones die, but they are like clones. They don't have any meaning. And here when you show anything that is gore, it produces visceral reaction because it's always meaningful. It's always tied to this person, and it's not like
one of the most sort of like heartbreaking things that I've actually read was there was the Pulse nightclub shooting, and it, absolutely horrific what happened. And afterwards, the cops were going in, and they were sort of like trying to sort of like clear the area. And they heard this ringing, and they couldn't figure out what it was. They realized that there had obviously been a news report that had gone out that there was a shooting at Pulse nightclub, and the ringing was everybody's cell phones of their loved ones trying to get a hold of them. And that, to me, the thought of going into a space and hearing those ringing is more horrific than any amount of violence and gore that you could possibly show. And I think there's a very sort of human emotion that we have to the idea of people being hurt.
I think also because you kind of care about the characters, Mac, Charlie, and Moses, that are exploring the spaces in Totem. You can kind of viscerally understand what they're feeling and emoting at the same time. We kind of tried to create as close a connection to those characters that they weren't just these kind of pure avatars of the player. They literally were little breathing characters in this world, and I think that also resonated. Well, watching people play the playthroughs and stuff, and the let's plays and Twitch streaming and stuff. When they see those things, they react beyond as someone reacted. They just saw a picture of that. I think it's everything. It's the sound. It's the imagery. It's the content of the imagery, as well as the characters that are discovering the area as well.
Okay, we've been going for an hour. I think we deserve a little bit break, and then we can get back to the gamey parts of Stasis.
Cool. Awesome. Okay? Sounds good.
Maybe let's start with the Moses bear design. Like, when did this start? What's the idea behind it? Like,
so our initial sort of setup was always to have a married couple, and then some sort of third thing that would be there. And early designs, Moses was essentially a humanoid, like almost like a C-3PO style robot, and he was going to be somebody that Charlie had rescued off of a a garbage pile, and she pieced them together. And he was very loyal to her and didn't like Mac, and that was going to be sort of the dynamic that we actually had. And I wanted to do that because then we could have a character that could walk at the bottom of the ocean and could do things while the other characters were sitting and doing their thing. It kind of Nic came up with the idea of the wife husband team losing their daughter, and that being their point of conflict. And then it became a little bit difficult of like trying to have like, how does this other character that fit into there? And I've always loved the teddy bear from AI, Teddy in AI. I've always loved that idea. I took a teddy bear model and I shoved it into mixer mode, and I did a little rig in mixer mode, and I gave it a little walk animation, and I burst out laughing. And I called Nic over and I said, "This is the cutest thing I've ever seen." As this little like teddy bear is sort of like waddling around. And that was very much, I was like, what if we take the daughter aspect of the story and we basically make the third this teddy bear, the super toy that she actually had. And again, it was one of those things where I sort of like, I did it without telling Nic, and then I showed him what I wanted to do, and then he was like, yes, let's actually go in that direction. And in the very, very early sort of drafts, and you can actually see it in the demo. I don't think the demo is actually still out there in the world.
People can probably find it.
Yeah, there's probably out there, or I'm sure you can find sort of walkthroughs of the demo. Moses' face was very much more teddy bearish. And then as we got into the design of them that I needed for the FMV, for the cinematics, I had to make his face the abomination that it turned into, of the sort of like really weird looking thing. But it all kind of worked. I absolutely adore him. He's one of my favorite characters that I've actually made. And I think he does sort of strike a very specific chord with a lot of people.
Yeah, he also, because he was a sort of an AI, advanced AI, very similar to the Teddy in AI, he was kind of childish, and he kind of had a very specific outlook. So he was an interesting character to write for. He was an interesting character for the player to use to explore the world. And we kind of could bring in some interesting conflict that functioned on multiple levels, because here's Mac, a grown man, being absolutely unkind to a little teddy bear.
Yeah.
And it created an interesting dynamic and dichotomy between the characters that you possibly wouldn't have if it was just a robot or just another human.
It was also a lot of fun to find the most horrific situations possible to put Moses in there. And ironically, he actually goes through sort of the most human related horror and tragedy, where obviously spoilers, but he finds the submarine, and there hasn't been any sort of like supernatural or sci-fi horrors happening. It's just been people that have acted out in this horrific situation that he essentially finds his journey through, and that was a lot of fun to actually write.
I also think Moses can't really understand what's happening in the environment, so it's his naivety also leads to interesting writing, interesting comical moments, and that kind of thing. Him trying to comprehend and understand what's going on, and I think him also we kind of imbued him with a lot of human emotions, and he, throughout the game, his character arc, where arcs are really important to us. Characters should never start and end at the same position. They should always learn something and change throughout the story. Moses overcomes his guilt and fear of water, and he becomes a brave bear at the end, and he never felt like a brave bear up to that point.
Yeah.
And again, these are easy tropes for us to play on, where we don't have to do a ton of exposition, because people understand that in fairy tales and storytales, the bear wants to be the brave bear to vanquish the dragon, and now he can be, and we kind of just putting that into sort of a more adult setting.
So again, I mean, if there's any bit of advice that people would get from this, it's like, don't be afraid of tropes. Take them, use them, and then find them to morph into ways that you let them do the heavy lifting for you, and then you can start finessing.
Well, let's just define tropes. Maybe just tropes would be preconceived ideas about specific environments or actions, or whatever. So if they're obviously they're used so often that they kind of become a part of common day understanding and parlance and vernacular, that people kind of, you show them something, they kind of understand the backstory without you having to elaborate. And we kind of use that on the characters as well. It does lend itself to a bit more stereotypes, and some people have had comments on that. Mac is this kind of burly, brash sailor, and Charlie's the smart, clever white engineer, But we did that for a reason, and we didn't just lean into stereotype because any ulterior motive. Our ulterior motive was just to tell the story in the simplest manner within our indie budget and skill set.
And the stereotypes are there for a reason also. Like, it kind of makes sense, Like, so a lot of the stuff, if you just switch the roles, for example, it would make less sense. So
exactly.
And
it would require a lot of explanation. So if we made Mac the science guy and Charlie just the mechanic, we would have or Charlie the big burly character and Mac the kind of athletic person. It would have needed more explanation and backstory than we had the capacity to do from a from budget and time.
I think it's like stereotypes aren't bad. They're bad if they become a crutch, but they're not bad if you use them to do, as I say, to do the heavy lifting in story stuff, so that you can take the stereotype and then you can mold it and you can change it into what you actually want, but you can still keep the core. It requires a lot. We're very respectful of our players' time, and we don't want to have something where we have to do 30 minutes of lore dump of explanation or something. If we can find a trope that they can basically use to basically cut that down to 5 minutes. And even things like Caliban, sort of like the all-knowing evil AI, we took that and it was twisted into something strange and unique, but it still has that core.
Caliban being another character.
Of the evil all-knowing AI with an attitude.
Yeah. And from the game perspective, you have 3 characters. We have 3 characters, and more often than not, they're separated. Also in kind of tropey, stereotypical way. But on the other hand, the events that actually separate them feel very natural. Like, they don't feel pushed. Like it's always for a reason, right?
Yeah. From a gameplay point of view, we needed to separate them because we obviously wanted that sort of multiple character adventure game. So at the beginning of the game, they're together, and then they're separated in the first chapter. They come together again, and then from the second chapter, the start of, they're all apart until the very end of the game. So we had to separate them, but like you said, we wanted it to be natural and in the story. We had to force them apart naturally. I suppose that's what we would do in any kind of film. You kind of we contrive the events to be able to push them apart. But the goal of the characters was always to get back together again. That was the driving force throughout the whole game, was to get all 3 back together again and get out. So you can kind of use those simple goals that drive the story along. You don't have to sit down and explain what the ultimate outcome is that's required by the characters. You can say the characters need to get together and escape. It's very simple. Players understand it, and then it makes the goals that they need to attain in the game much easier.
Yeah. And actually finding a way to actually separate them naturally was incredibly difficult. It was one of the first big, because essentially you need to use gameplay to separate them. You can't just sort of like story contrive like they're separate, and it was to work together. And in fact, in my very, very early drafts, I had them separate from the beginning. So Charlie went in one direction, she got locked in a room, Mac came out to try to help her, Heath had something, and then Moses was activated later. And the original story, Moses was actually going to be staying on the oil rig above, and Charlie and Mac would have been below. But then Nic came up with a way to have all three characters on screen at the same time, and still the control mechanism that we had, it didn't break the control scheme that we had for the rest of the game. So we actually went back and I rewrote a lot of that first intro, and then getting up to the part where they actually separated the game. And that part where Charlie sort of goes into the room as Mac holds the door open for her, took about 2 weeks to figure out how, like, just from a narrative point of view, like, how do we actually do that? And at one point we said it's just going to be a cinematic because we couldn't figure it out. But then thankfully we did. Yeah, we found something that worked.
Once they were separated, it became a lot easier because they could each go on their own little path and all have. So essentially, because the game is essentially 3 stories being told in parallel. It comes with I'm sure we'll get just now to the complexity of doing that. It's insanely complicated to do because you can't have one person carrying the story forward too far ahead. You're going to get story issues. So,
and you can't have one character that knows something here, and they'll know another key piece of information 2 screens away that they talk to another character about who doesn't also know that bit of information. It became a spreadsheet nightmare.
Yeah, let's talk about this because then we can talk about the puzzles, and this is kind of connected. But yeah, so this will be full of spoilers, but we're already down the path. So you should play Stasis Bone Totem beforehand. But Charlie has this secret, and she knows more than it looks like at the first glance. And sometimes you can tell that there's something going on because you made it quite nicely also with just like not forthrightly to the player's face, but like picking up bits of information. And how did you make it so that at a given point of time nobody says or does anything that is outside of the spectrum of it supposed to know at this point?
So a lot of that actually came from us figuring out how to do a similar thing on Beautiful Desolation. So Beautiful Desolation, at one point in the game goes almost completely open world, and you can visit any space in any order, and you have to do these sort of quests. And the difficulty with that, obviously, is if you go and you fit, and our quests in Beautiful Desolation generally ended with the destruction of one of the civilizations, and you would sort of choose which civilization would actually end. But of course, the problem with that comes in that when you've got multiple quests that you can essentially do from beginning to the end, that have these world-altering events, but you have other quests that would have referenced those events but can't because you don't know if the player has actually done them. How do you actually work that out? And the way that we did it in Beautiful Desolation was we actually separated the game out into 3 completely separate storylines that actually have absolutely no interplay with each other at all. And then occasionally what we would do is we would have one of the characters in the storyline reference something very vaguely in the other storyline that they didn't, that was disconnected from a gameplay point of view. And just having those little narrative references made you feel as though everything was happening at the same time.
One thing we did do when we put together the screenplay document that was so the screenplay in the game, all the dialogue was written by a guy by the name of Jack Barton, who's actually a Hollywood screenwriter. He's really, really good. He's an author, sci-fi author. He does brilliant podcasts, outstanding dialogue wordsmith, script doctor, brilliant writer. And but what we did was we gave him this intense spreadsheet which listed all the various scenes in the game. So I think it was like 100 scenes, what characters were in them, and what the characters would know at that point in the game, and whether they could go backwards and forwards up the hierarchy of the story. And then he kind of took that information and then ran with it.
So every conversation had an ID. So convo_48, and this would have been Moses's conversation as he enters this room. Then I had a list of things that Moses would know, the mood that he could be in, and what information he needs to find out, and what he wouldn't know. And then Jack could use that over there to write the dialogue. And then the dialogue was then further broken up into conversations that can take place in any order versus conversations that we know the absolute order that they're going to take place in. So conversation 56 can't take place before conversation 32. Like if you have conversation 32, conversation 56 will happen after that. And those that are there were essentially highlighted as our large narrative ones. So we could tell the more linear story in those conversations, and the other conversations, we had very specific things that you couldn't actually reference. This became a big spreadsheet.
If you're making sort of a purely linear game, it's a lot easier because you can also tell the emotional state of the character. And you can tell your voice actor, at this point, you're really scared or whatever the case may be, or you're angry at the other character because the other character said something. But we had the problem in that we didn't always know the exact emotional state of the characters because we didn't know where they would be. So some games have got around this. I can't think of any of the names of challenge you can, but I have read where basically what they do is they record, because our game is fully voice acted.
Dead Space does.
Dead Space does, yeah. So what they'll do is they'll record the same lines in different
emotional
states, so that they can play the emotional state that's apt for that particular discussion. We obviously didn't have the budget to that, so we had to do a lot more clever things. We had a lot of blockers where we would know, okay, if the players were all in this position, they could only be in this position if they were handed this item. So we know roughly where they are. Therefore, we know that they would have these conversations, and we can emote this way in this stat.
And then we made things even more complicated for ourselves by having portraits, and the portraits change depending on where the character actually is, specifically with Charlie. So Charlie's got about 4 different portraits and outfits in the game, where she goes from sort of like looking normal, then she's in the suit, then she sort of gets hurt in that. So we had to then tie up the different portraits, but the portraits could take place at different parts of the game as well. So we had to organize the dialogue as to what portrait was currently being displayed. Yeah. And then to add that, we had different voice processing dependent on where they were in the game. So when Charlie's in the underwater suit, her voice is different from when it's out of the suit. But
so there's conversations you can only have when she's in the suit. So.
And there's parts of the game where Mac is doing something and Charlie should be, we don't know if Charlie is in the suit or out of the suit. So how do we actually manage that? And the way we got around that was the radio that when the dialogue switches, when you choose Mac and Mac is having a conversation with Charlie, it's a little radio portrait. And we pulled the camera right up close to the radio portrait, so you can't see if her eyes look different or if her face looks different. And we just played that dialogue. And we found that if you were playing with Charlie and she was in the underwater suit, and then you switched to Mac and he was talking to the radio, you automatically assume that the radio was coming from the underwater suit, even though she could have that same conversation out of the water. And that saved our lives a lot, but it still was. It was a mega spreadsheet. I think Jack, our writer, still has like flashbacks of this.
Just a lot of administration on the back end. We weren't able to just wing it and say, read the story linearly and the voice actors will act like this. It just was a lot of admin, but we managed it. I think that we kind of thought about it logically and thought, where would the players be? And we kind of brainstormed every possibility and came up with spreadsheets. Yeah. So the game is incredibly complicated like that, but we didn't want the player to feel that it was complicated like that. That would have been terrible. So it kind of has to happen really naturally.
Yeah, but nobody should see us doing these things behind the scenes. It should just feel naturally. Yeah, it just feel very natural in playing.
Yeah, when it feels naturally, you don't see this. Like usually, like, if it works out, you don't see all the work. Yes. Like you only see it when it's breaks.
The breaking.
Yes. Yeah. If somebody noticed it, it'd be like, oh crap, we did a bad job. But nobody noticed it, and people sort of take for granted the fact that you can go really far with some of the characters into the story, and it doesn't break, which is amazing. Because games are so easy to break, and the fact that it doesn't break is incredible.
Yeah, so just to explain that, if they're listening to this podcast and they haven't actually played the game, because you're controlling 3 characters, each character can go off on their own quest, but the other characters are reliant on things that the one character's done. And so you can get a situation where one character has gone really far away from the other characters, and we sort of had to rein that in. Now, how do we stop that from happening? So the easiest way to do that was actually with items. So if a character got to a point where they couldn't go any further, we would lock them into an area where they needed an item from another character, and that other character had to progress to get that item. That was the simplest way to do it. But
it almost became like a leapfrogging of people playing these through.
But no playthrough would be identical because players would take the characters in different. There's obviously the optimal way to play it, but players might not play the optimal way. So
that actually had a very nice narrative advantage in that the game does feel like you're these three characters working together to get out of a situation, because mechanically the game is designed around three people working together to get out of a situation. Where something, if you look at the Act 2 of Broken Age, there's essentially you can get information from the other characters, but you can complete one character's journey almost entirely to the end of it, and it's like, okay, complete the entire journey. And you can't do that in Bone Totem. We get to certain points where you have to have work together. You have to split between the three characters. And we wanted to encourage switching and moving between the areas as much as possible.
We also wanted a situation where if someone gets stuck with one character, they can then kind of rest their brain and play the other character. They're not in that kind of classic adventure game situation where you just can't go any further and you have to consult a hint book. That might happen in the game, but the chances are that'll only happen once you've taken all three characters as far as you can go, and then you're stuck. So I think it kind of I think players reacted well to that design choice.
And this leads me to the question about the puzzles. Were you using puzzles and items as a way to like formulate the narrative and like make the structure out of it for all three characters, or was this like puzzles more like the gameplay aspect that you wanted there for the puzzle's sake, to play it for players to figure out the stuff? How do you view this?
I think it's a bit of everything. I think it all has to work together. I don't know if puzzle design is necessarily our strength when it comes to our games. I think you get certain games that are way better at puzzles than what we can actually do, way smarter at puzzles than what we can actually do. And we definitely try to lead into our puzzles being simpler mechanically to even what our previous games have actually done. As a way, we didn't want people to be stuck with the puzzles. We wanted the puzzles to essentially give a reason for the players to want to go on to the next part of the narrative. So when we had super complicated puzzles, Nic was actually very much the czar of that in terms of like cutting it down. Like, don't make it that complicated. Is there a simpler way to actually do this? Can we cut that down to a simpler?
We also kind of went with the idea that we wanted players to feel smart once they finished a puzzle. We wanted them to say they should have a small aha moment and finish it up, and it gives them a nice success, and then they move on. We didn't want it to be that they're stuck on 5 minutes and then they feel stupid. We have one or two puzzles like that people still complain about in the game, but for the most part, the puzzles were relatively mechanically simple. They looked complicated, but once you kind of knew the solution, it was very easy to do. And I think it gave a nice bit of an endorphin hit to the player that they're smart. They finished that puzzle. They're prepared to go into the next one.
And there's also there's something you can do with. I don't know if a lot of adventure games do this, but it's actually controlling pacing through how easy or how difficult puzzles actually are. And our preference is generally to have 5 easy puzzles as opposed to one very difficult puzzle. So 5 easy puzzles that are way simpler, that all work together to get to a final goal, instead of just having that final goal into a very complicated puzzle to actually open that. So let's say we had, for example, you need to open a door. Instead of having a complicated sliding lock thing puzzle, we would have 5 small interactions to get an item, combine it, type in a computer code, the door actually opens. And that very much informed a lot of the way that we actually did it, was to simplify and streamline the puzzles, have more simple interactions that combine to feel much more complicated than they actually are.
We also, because our game is isometric, we have the problem in that we're pretty far away from the characters. So we're not zoomed up close. We can't really see the character's hands. That's a couple of pixels wide. So we have a problem in that we wanted to avoid the pixel hunting that is sort of basically a part of this genre. So we sort of had this idea that every time we interact with the puzzle will kind of pull up full screen and be a first-person view of the puzzle in your face, big descriptions, a highlighter inside that puzzle. We didn't want people to be stuck in pixel hunting. We even have a little hint system. If you access a puzzle more than 2 or 3 times, it pops up a little hint in the corner, and the player will kind of push you in the right direction vaguely. So we sort of really wanted people to finish the puzzle. We didn't want them to be stuck. And then for the puzzles designs themselves, we took a lot of inspiration from like the Silent Hill type games and a couple of the Resident Evil type puzzles and that. Just all sort of bound to the real world. We didn't want anything to be like ridiculous. That some of the puzzles become in adventure games. We all wanted them to feel that they were in this world and could be an obstacle that if someone was playing in this environment, they would encounter.
Interestingly, from a design point of view, I finished all of the environments to the game, and we had it that you could walk from one side of the game all the way to the other side of the game. We didn't have any puzzles in. You could walk through all the doors, do a complete walk through the entire game as completed environments. And then we decided afterwards to add these full screen puzzles in. We had a conversation about how to actually do it, because we had our regular puzzle interactions that were, again, if you find the demo of Bone Totem, you can see it was, you click and drag the actual item in the scene and you use it in the scene instead of the close zoomed up part of the puzzle. And we had to sort of take some of our design and then retrofit it into our environments. And it actually added probably another year onto the development, but it was worth it.
Yeah, we looked at hidden object games, which have a lovely full screen renders of puzzle environments. Some of them are really complicated. Like the latest ones that are coming out are literally adventure games themselves, and not just kind of find 50 objects in the game. They have a lot of interactions, that kind of thing. And we kind of wanted to grab a bit of that vibe in there, that we can show off the art, and once again try to tie the player into what was happening in the environment a little bit closer than is possible with the disconnected isometric view.
As I said, like I wanted to have that Indiana Jones part where you turn the sundial and a bit of dust falls down on you as something actually happens. And when we sort of switched to the idea of every single puzzle scene that we had was going to be zoomed up, it changed it. And it also, it very much informed a lot of the UI and UX that we actually did in that, well, I'm sure Nic will be able to talk more about that. He very much took the reins with the UI and UX. But it made us, it simplified parts of the game in that it lets, the person knew that they could just explore the environment. And when there was a puzzle, it was full screen. And that's when you would use your items and that. And before, when you're just walking around the environment, you can just enjoy the environment without having to
try and use every object and click on everything.
Yeah. So it limited where we basically naturally limited where players could use objects, which is something that's obviously a thing with adventure games. You get to the point where you get stuck and you just use everything on everything, which I think if the screens are small, it's fine if you've got like 3 interactive spots on a screen. But because we specifically wanted very large environments, very big scrolling environments that you could move around, having that additional disconnect between the puzzle screens and the exploration screens helped in making the puzzles actually flow better into the narrative and not frustrating the player. As we said, we want to respect our players' time and not have them just sort of be stuck in this endless circle of clicking on things. And that even came down to us limiting how many items you could actually have in an inventory at a time. And we had these little sort of goals and rules that we set up for ourselves.
Yeah, I think this is the another part when I just now realized, and it's kind of it had to work flawlessly because of that. It's that you don't spam your items during walking. You can appreciate all the scenery. You know that the puzzle time is when you have the full screen close up, right? And this is where you figure the stuff out, and then you do the items, but not on like dragging on different dead bodies, different items, trying to see what happens.
We also took the so adventure games have always had an object since the mid-90s. They've had an object highlighter where It'll highlight all the interactive areas in the scene. I'm not sure which game did it first, but it's been kind of a part of the genre. But we kind of wanted it to be a bit more diegetic, a bit more part of the environment. So we came up with this idea that when the characters can ping the environment with spacebar or right click, it shoots out these lines from their little wristwatch that they've got over there that highlights all the things that are described in the game and that are interactable. So they each got a different color, the green and the blue, which meant that the character would know what would pop up as a puzzle, and it would know it was a description. And again, just kind of simplifying the interactions by showing exactly what they need to do and where they need to interact.
And where did this idea come from? Because like it also greatly interacts with this environment that is dark. So you don't know where to go or whether there is a place to go. You hit the spacebar and then you see, there is like an important thing because it's blue. Like it's not a narrative aspect. It's not green, for example. It's blue. I gotta go there. Even though it's dark and I wouldn't expect that there is a path there. So when this idea came from?
So I think it was just a sort of a natural evolution of the object highlighter. Data-link games all have the spacebar that kind of does a little circle or dot on things that are interactable. But we sort of took it further because we use descriptions in the game. We also highlight the descriptions as well. The guy who wrote the description spent a year writing them. It was quite a massive task for him to write all these descriptions. He's actually an RPG writer who writes descriptions for
he writes for Tuesday night games who do the Mothership he pen and paper RPG.
He writes RPG descriptions for a living, so he was pretty happy to do it. So over a year he wrote it was about 2 years before the game actually came out, but over a year he basically wrote all these descriptions for me, and I was very concerned. Obviously it cost us a lot of money for his time, but also to translate them, there was like 35,000 words of description, and we were worried that players aren't going to read them because it is a bit of a pixel hunt to find the descriptions. So we thought, okay, well, if it shoots out a highlighter, the player can quickly just mouse over all the descriptions, and at least we'll sort of guarantee that they'll read the flavor text that will kind of further describe the world. It won't be a sort of a money sink of what we did. So
it's actually something I would have loved to have added one more layer onto that system of once you'd actually read something, it maybe changed the line color or like faded it out a little bit. Maybe sort of take that system and just kind of make it even slicker than it actually was. Especially even with the puzzles. Like if you'd finished the puzzle screen, maybe change the color of the line to yellow or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think if we did do another isometric game, we probably would roll all the things that we learned from Totem into the new game. And that's kind of the natural evolution. Obviously, there's always things that you want to do, and also based on the feedback that you get from the players who played this game, things they liked and didn't like, we'd try and introduce in the next isometric adventure game. When we do that. So I think that, I think it's sort of a learning exercise all the way through it. So if you ask specifically where it came from, trial and error, watching people play the game, watching people play. We released a demo of Bone Totem during a Steam Fest. And that was a fantastic bit of feedback to watch people, a couple of thousand people play the game. And we could kind of screen record what they were doing and kind of understand where they were getting stuck and what they were responding to.
And that almost like the lesson we learned from Beautiful Desolation was, in a way, it's almost as important or more important to know what doesn't work as opposed to what does actually work. And in watching people play the Bone Totem demo, it showed us a lot of where there's points of frustration were. It's almost no use in getting feedback of like, wow, your game is really good. It's like it's awesome to hear that, but we don't know how to turn it into something actionable.
If people even negative reactions, especially to the demo side, the things that don't like, that's valuable information for us. I think a lot of indies kind of take that negative information, those negative comments, and they kind of internalize it and think that everything they do is terrible and no one likes it and whatever. Screw those guys! I'm going to do what I want anyway. But the point is that those people are giving you fantastic feedback that you can't buy. I mean, especially if they're fans of the genre. I mean, you got to take the criticism from whence it comes. But
I read every single review of our games. I read every single negative review of our games. And I actually have a document where if people have good points, specifically the negative reviews, I actually go and I add it into that document. And it becomes something that I know that we can take a look at and work on for our
Sometimes it's harsh, man.
Yeah.
It's harsh.
I'm not telling people to negatively review our games. Please don't do that. But I am definitely saying that, like, we definitely do learn a lot, and we try to internalize, or try to not internalize the negative parts of a negative review, but see it as a way to actually make a better game as we. And I think that has shown, like, all of our games, we have improved in certain areas, and hopefully we'll continue doing that.
Okay. So what other than UI UX improvements you've done over the time of development? Because we've talked about the arrows, we also can talk about the inventory, right, and passing objects.
That's what Nic can definitely talk to the speed.
Sure. No, I think a big thing on Totem was gamepad, native gamepad support from release. A lot of games, what happens, they retrofit the gamepad into the game, and we didn't want to do that because it becomes quite difficult with the UI and the UX, and we didn't want to sort of have a situation where we've got two various versions of the game, and we have to rethink how we do things. So we kind of thought about the gamepad implementation from day one. We wanted it to be on the Steam Deck. We knew that we had to at least support Xbox controllers. And we also wanted to release on the console and Switch, and we were like, okay, well, so Beautiful Desolation, which was published by a publisher, we had nothing to do with it. They took the game and published it, and they spent like 6 months getting the controller to work with it and stuff. And we wanted to avoid that kind of lag in the release time, because we thought if we got full control of it, we can make sure that the game plays well with the controller. And they can just worry about porting it over to the platform. It won't be a situation where they then have to invent gameplay mechanics for our game on how to change the UI UX.
Yeah, there's obviously there's different ways that you actually approach a puzzle when you're using a gamepad to when you're using a mouse to when you're using a keyboard. And it's difficult to retrofit that after the fact. But if we keep that in mind from the beginning of our design, it becomes a lot easier.
I would advise any indie developers to think about gamepad support from day one, especially if you're doing a management game or a mouse keyboard driven game. Still think about that gamepad interaction from day one. Don't try and retrofit it afterwards or after release or whatever. Even at the end of development, it's an absolute nightmare. You've got to kind of think from the beginning how to, just like a save system, it's something you need to build from the beginning. You've got to think about that. We also, what was quite nice about Totem is that the gamepad implementation is quite seamless with the mouse. So I can pick up the gamepad at any point and use it, and I can use the mouse. I can then transition over to the mouse very easily as well. Like it's really slick in the way it does it, and it doesn't change the whole UI. The UI functions both for the gamepad and for the mouse as easily. The gamepad obviously is a little bit different because it gives you direct control of the character. But
we have to split branches.
Yeah. We don't have to have multiple branches of the game. Everything was contained in the same code base, in the same scene, and you could instantly switch between the two. And we did that purposely. That was quite a big undertaking, but once we got it working, it informed a lot of. Also, when you think about things from a gamepad UI UX point of view, it does influence the way you do the mouse interface as well. But I think that it can be done really badly, but it can also be done really well, because you have to kind of simplify things a little bit. If you're just focusing purely on mouse keyboard interaction, you kind of, and in our games, like entirely mouse interaction, you can kind of get away with having buttons all over the place and that kind of thing. Whereas with console, you have to contain things a little bit more and make things a little bit slicker, which I think it did actually help the development of the UI on the keyboard mouse side by also thinking about the gamepad at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah. So,
do you know how many players actually use the gamepad, like percentage-wise?
I think Well, just on PC and on Steam Deck, you're looking at about 10 to 15%. But obviously, it made the console port much easier. So obviously, consoles have 100% and Switch 100% because it flicks right into that. So it cut down on the time and
also I think it can also be kind of a deciding factor in
the publisher.
In the publishers, because the difference between taking a game and adding console support is an extra 6 months of time for them. Taking a game that already has console support could be the difference in them either saying yes to you doing it or in the deal that you can actually strike with them. So it is something that if you can, the amount of work that you put in the beginning definitely pays off later on. It's a pain. Like we couldn't do things like we very specifically didn't have timed puzzles because we were like, can somebody with the controller, will they be able to have the split-second resources to be able to move the mouse from there to there to do something? So there were just certain things we had to actually change. But the minute you sort of like, you think about those design things, it becomes just part of the rule set that you set up in doing your puzzle interactions.
Okay. Yeah, and also like sales. Like there are people that, especially on the consoles, but like on PC that are used to playing this with controller, and like they will be less interested if it's not a control support. Right?
And it's all about maximizing, especially as an indie, we want to get as many, we don't have our marketing budget zero. So we want to get as many people playing the game as possible. And if we can say, also sports gamepad, it's just another USP for us to use to get people to come and play the game. The fact that also that it's native on Steam Deck as well. And our game is also soon Steam Deck verified and certified by Valve. Means that people can play on just another platform, which is basically free for us to advertise on, and we're getting players on that side. So if you times out your time and you've got a couple of thousand extra players who wouldn't play it, but they will play it because of Steam Deck, it kind of makes it worth it. But maybe retrofitting it wouldn't make it worth it because am I going to spend 2 or 3 months implementing it and then having to test it and then test it again? It becomes a nightmare. So my recommendation, indie devs, build that support in the beginning.
It's the same as like if you're planning on doing localization, you need to plan your localization the way it's going to say it from the get-go. As you're putting dialogue, as you're putting things in the game, you have to think about that localization support. And it's the same thing with controller support.
That's the other thing. Our games have always been translated into many languages. I think Stasis one's like 13 languages. I think Totem was 9, if I'm not mistaken. So we've always because of the genre, because adventure games are enjoyed by many people, specifically in Europe. We have varied markets to sell to. So German, Polish, French, Russian, etc., all the way through to Turkish, and those communities like adventure games. But a lot of them will not play the games if they're not in their native tongue. So to push ourselves up, and at this point, all the languages have paid for themselves. Thank goodness. So to push our sales in those areas, we've always on all our games we've translated them into the various languages. Translation is something that, again, just like gamepad support, is something that you need to think about at the beginning of the game. You can't just hard code everything, especially in a narrative game. Maybe if you've got 100 strings, you can do it and you can retrofit it. But in a narrative game with 70, I think we've got 84,000 words, and other games have had 70,000 words odd. It's an enormous amount of text that needs to be thought of. How are you going to actually get into the game, hot swap it, reference the strings, deal with
it also has massive effects on your actual art
and UI.
Art. So you can't use words.
Yes.
You can't use word puzzles. You have to use symbols. You can't use things where the word can be read backwards as well as forwards. You can't rely on the in-world graffiti sort of like tropes to explain very important parts of the story because somebody might not be able to actually
translate it. Yeah.
So it becomes, and and you could like hot swap graphics when you do a translations, but then you can't have fan translations. So you can't have somebody like we can just provide CSVs to our fans, and they do fan translations, and they get read directly in the game. And if you're having to rely on graphics hot swaps, you can't do that because they're going to have to then do their own graphics, and it becomes like a
so we basically have to think about, especially in a puzzle game, you have to be a little bit more literal and visual with your puzzles. You can't, like Chris says, you can't rely on like English linguistics to tell the puzzle. It does limit you. That's, I think, why some of the adventure games, specifically in this genre, don't translate, because it is complicated, and it does kind of limit the focus and scope of the game a little bit. But you also have to think about things like the if you're going to use like German, you've got extra characters, you've got to allow for an extra 30% than you would if you were just doing English, for instance. So there's a lot of sort of little caveats that you have to think about with translation. And I think a lot of that stuff you can learn online, but a lot of it's just done through trial and error. We like Chris said, we have a system in Totem specifically that literally loads it hot swaps CSV files into the game when they select a different translations, all done in a spreadsheet. And what this allowed us to do, and it's one of the reasons that the game's reviewed so well by many of the official publications, saying that some of them said it's the best translations they've ever read in the game. Specifically, I think the Polish one we won an award for the best translation from a Polish magazine that ever seen. But the reason why it was so well received is that we built the tools that the translators could quickly load the translations into the game and play it and check it themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, live.
Yeah. So
as they did the writing, they could see their strings in the game as they played it.
They could just refresh the language, and the language will refresh, and then they can basically play the game in their language. We also have like a lot of debug rooms where they can quickly play all the they can see what they've done, read all the PDAs in their language.
And we also had a Discord group with all of the translators in, and they were all actually sort of helping each, because the writing in Bone Totem, specifically with the descriptions, is very, very flowery and very, very overly descriptive and very Lovecraftian in the way that and we told the writer, we said, be as poetic as you can be, and that's of course very difficult to translate. So the Discord group was sort of like the guys who are doing the German thing would speak to the Polish translator, like how did you translate this specific part? What cultural touchstones could you use instead of this word? Use this word, and it became quite a cool. It was very fun to actually see the translators all moving through the story and working through their translations together.
Yeah. So I think, so the question was like that on the tech side, building tools that allowed translation to be hot swapped into the game really is important. If you're doing translations, you don't want a case where someone has to send you the files, you have to do a special build for them, send it back to them.
Oh, this would be a nightmare. This would be a nightmare.
And ironically, that's the way that Unreal actually works by default. Like you have to import the CSVs into the data tables and that. So so I think that anybody, if you're doing a game that you want to support multiple languages, make it that you can hot swap it directly off the hard drive. Then the other things that we did special on the tech side was we actually built some tools, some software tools for our writer, that he could visually, it kind of looked like a like Twine,
like blueprints almost.
Yeah, like Twine, like blueprints. But he could basically play because this game was the dialogue and the voice acting was so integral. The reason we chose Jack Barton to do the writing is that he actually has a studio that does audio recording as well for voice actors. So they do like studio reads, and he specializes in voice directing voice actors. So he basically produced the voices for us, and he did the writing, which was a unique position for us to be in.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And he cast all of the actors, and he did all of the audio production.
His company did it.
On the audio. So it was very much it was from his mind to have the writer be able to direct the actors.
Of the dialogue.
Of the dialogue was very important.
But what we did was we developed some tools for him this app that he could basically copy all the strings of the text and the WAV file and actually play out the conversations as they would play in the game. And they actually play out with the little portraits that pop up, so you could kind of get a feel for it. And then here's the data files that he generated, he gave back to us, and they slotted right into the game. So we could play the game with his WAV files and his data files directly in the game. We didn't have to then go and like rework all the text wave. He's literally giving us back the text file, the data files, and the WAV files from that app that exported it and played in the game.
And he also had access to the game.
And he could test it in the game.
So you could do his writing, load those files, play the game, and actually see the dialogue playing out in the game, make any changes he wanted to do, reload the files. So you could literally play the game live and do his writing. As a character walks into a room, they see something, he can pick that up as he's playing the game and actually write that into the dialogue.
No, so basically, Chris and I have this kind of idea that we're dealing with professionals, and we should give them all the resources that they need to be able to do their job properly. We've done projects where we basically just give the translator the translation files, they come up with the translation, send it back, but it's never going to be as good as someone who literally is going to play the game and have a look at it, especially at the proofreading stage. They can actually experience the game and say, this is not working, let me change this. The tone is off. Let's change it. And I think that really shows in the game. But again, it's giving them the tools that enable them to do that, which I think AAA studios probably do, but I don't think indies think about that to that level.
I think. So I was going to say, because Nic started off making our corporate tools, the idea of tool work, and that's just like comes very naturally to the way that we actually produce our games. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's okay. I was wondering, how much time did it take for the full dialogue plus voice acting?
I think Jack did it over, I think it was 4 or 5 months that he was busy with it. It might have been 6 months in total from contracting him to do it. But there was a lot of back and forth on sort of the dialogue and that, and he did it in chunks. So he would do a bit, we'd check it, just see where he's going, and you'd send it back. But like writers are really quick, those authors and stuff, especially if they're professionals in the industry, they can write dialogue like amazingly quickly. The actual recording of the voices doesn't take long. I mean, that takes a couple of days of recording sessions. The longest time is cutting up all the audio, getting it all into the engine and stuff. But like I said, we gave him the tools that he could do that all himself and test it. So when we were able to get that stuff done, I think about 6 months.
Yeah. We also we tend to be very hands off with people that we actually work with. We like to choose the right people, and we give them the tasks, and then it's that they must do it.
Yeah.
And we find that the more freedom that we give the people that we work with, the better the result is. Yeah. And also it makes the game and makes stories very much an amalgamation of people at the height of their creativity. We don't like to micromanage creators. If we want to work with you, it's because we love your work, and we don't want you to change that work into something that we would actually want. So although the core story for Bone Totem came from Nic and I, it's definitely like Jack's fingerprints are all over it, and we let him run wild with all of his crazy.
So the more minds that are kind of working on the story, like Jack came up with Caliban as a character, and he extends Ferran's story as well. Just because from a narrative, he's a narrative expert, he kind of knows what you have to do, and to tell an effective story, and to sort of get the characters to emote the way that they should do.
It was even quite fun because they were. Like he came up with the Nexus was entirely Jack's idea. And I was playing through the dialogue and they mentioned it, and I said to Nic, I was like, man, that's awesome. So he got all these new ideas that we could actually branch off of. And that just came from as I said, just like letting him.
So when I say 6 months, it wasn't 6 months of full-time development. It was like he would like do some stuff, send it to us, we'd check back a couple of days later. I don't know, if you probably compressed it, it probably was a month of work that he actually did over that period of time. But we kind of just extended it over till he was. I think he was a bit shocked about how much work. Because it's the first video game he's worked on.
Yeah,
that's podcasts and TV shows and books. so this was quite a shock. But he did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
He's actually working with us already on our new game. We for Totem, we brought him in at the latter part of the development. We'd already developed all the screens and the graphics, and now we were looking for someone to write the dialogue. We already had the story structure and the story design and everything.
I was going to do the dialogue. I've done the dialogue in most of our other games. I don't necessarily enjoy doing it.
Yeah,
I can do it, but it's not something that I like story. I don't like dialogue.
Yeah.
So getting somebody who is a professional in that over there definitely wants to innovate the game as much.
Yeah. So then Jack came in and at a later stage, and then on our new game, we've involved him right in the early stage because he had really good ideas on the last one, but there were things we weren't able to implement because we were so far along. So we thought, let's bring a writer in. Obviously, it's way more expensive because you've got to pay them for an extra entire phase of the development. But I think our stories are going to be even better on our new games because he's been involved in a or whatever professional you choose.
Yeah.
Be involved right in the beginning of the story, especially if you intended to write the dialogue at a later date.
That's quite a game to start with, by the way, for Jack. Like,
yes.
Imagine.
Yes.
Okay.
He is brilliant though. He does his podcast is done. It's called Derelict, and Fathom is his other one, and they are the best. We actually found him because we listened to the podcast. We're like, these are the best audio produced podcasts we've ever heard.
Yeah.
They're like movies. They're amazing, and each of them is like an hour, 45 minutes long. It's crazy.
Yeah.
He's so damn good. And
I'm a big believer just like shooting my shot. So like if I want to work with somebody, I'll just send them a mail or send them a tweet or something. That's how we work with Mick Gordon on Beautiful Desolation. We worked with Mark Morgan, who did the music for Totem and the original Stasis, and even Jack. And we were fans of his writing and his podcast before we even worked with him. And I just sort of like floated the idea to Nick. I was like, this guy's never going to work with us. Little did Nick know I'd already actually emailed him and asked him if he wanted to work with us. And then I was just telling him, should I email the guy? I'd already gotten the reply from Jack saying, yeah, he'll set up a meeting with us. So, yeah, and that, I mean, it's just, I think it's going to make our next game better. It changed a lot of how we are doing our next game, in the idea of involving a narrative designer much earlier.
Yeah, I think it's a lesson that maybe III or AA or AAA indies kind of learn, is bring that narrative designer in early. And sometimes with the indies who are sort of just trying to make a game and keep the team really small, you kind of bring that in at a later date. But I think if you can bring that expertise in early in the project, it's quite valuable.
Yeah.
Just to kind of work with another mind who's got a different take on the story.
I think especially if you can find somebody who likes the same kind of things that you do and likes the sort of like the genres that you work in. We'll have a meeting with Jack, and the first hour of the meeting will be all of us complaining about Star Wars, and then we'll sort of go into like 30 minutes of actual meeting for the games.
I think another thing that Chris and I often do is we've always done this on writing, is dealing with people who are not necessarily in the games industry. Pretty much all the writers we've ever worked with have been people who are not game writers. I think game writers tend to write for video games, where we like to kind of work with people who write for other things, and we can it's easy for us to show them what we wanted to do in the video game side, and they come with like way more fresh ideas than people who've kind of written 500 RPGs and the same description of a piece of armor. Rather take someone who writes for traditional pen and paper RPGs and get them to write for a digital product, or we'll get like a writer who's just does creative writing as a side hobby and get him to write like some of the diary entries. And that's what we did with this game. We had a whole bunch of writers just from very different backgrounds. Just an open call on Twitter. He's like, gave a little prompt and said, write us a little paragraph that describes this prompt. We chose the best people, and they all got to write a diary in the game.
PDAs? PDAs?
Yeah.
Nice. Nice.
PDAs, yeah. The PDAs, yeah.
Nice. Okay.
The PDAs were edited by one of the editors from Studio Zam, Disco Elysium. But the base writing was all done by just normal people. They weren't specifically game writers. So
Okay.
I think it shows. Yeah.
I think it shows greatly like that. There's variety of backgrounds in this.
Yes.
You can see this, like it's a different thing. It's a different thing
Yes.
every time. Tell me a little bit about marketing for such a game. Like how much of the visceral, gory stuff you flash to actually market the game.
Marketing is difficult. I mean, I think it's the number one thing if you had to ask any indies what, specifically independents. I suppose even way up to AAA, they don't really know what they're doing these days either. The market's changed so much, no one really knows how the heck to market games. It's just throw a lot of money in it and at it and hope it sticks. And that's really the AAA kind of approach. But we don't have a lot of money, so we can't do that. So we always sort of, we've tried to, well, we are fortunate. There's a luck element involved because specifically that we already have a built-in audience for our game. So that initial game that we made, Stasis, had an audience, and that audience generally kind of sticks with us and at least follows our newer games. We're always trying to do different things because we don't want to just have the same audience forever. But we love our core audience. We have like a Discord channel and the guys chat about adventure games, that kind of thing. But we're always trying to look for more people to enjoy it because we don't really want to make the same kind of games forever. We like to try and change it up occasionally. So marketing specifically for Totem, we ran a small little crowdfunding campaign. We didn't raise as much as we would have with Kickstarter, but we raised some money. We built like a little core audience of a couple of thousand people. And we kept them updated very often on our newsletters to what we were up to. Chris keeps a Twitter that he posts to every day, and he tries to interact with as many people as possible. We have various rules in our studio. We never ever say anything political. We never ever get involved in any kind of social stuff. We just make it. As people, we don't do that stuff. We just make cool games.
And it can be hard because, one of the easiest way to grow yourself on social media is to be negative.
Yeah.
To not want to do that and to very specifically have as part of our studio culture, not having that, it does stifle you, but it also has created a very loyal community who just like our games, who just want to talk to us about the stuff that we really
that stuff that we want to talk about is video games. We don't really want to get involved in any politics, and we come from a very politically charged country where everyone's got something to say, but we really just, specifically for our video games, we just want to talk about our video games and cool sci-fi stuff and that. So I think that's a lot of people respond to that as well. Whether they know it or not, we don't get involved in any kind of the controversies that are. There's always some controversy going on. Yeah. So Twitter's a big marketing avenue for us to get that initial kind of blast out. But one thing I think that is ignored totally by indie developers specifically is a mailing list. We have a very big mailing list of emails, and we periodically send out a marketing email. Just letting people know what we're up to, a little newsletter. We don't do it often. We don't want to spam people in. I'm going to say often, once every 6 months. We'll just keep everyone abreast when we've got something to say. But our mailing list is pretty huge. I mean, like 20,000 people who've signed up to our mailing list. Even on our website now, we get at least 1 or 2 signups a day on our mailing list. People will pop their email in there and they'll want to know, keep abreast. We've built that over the last 10 years, so we kind of have a base that we can instantly tell about a project that we're working on. My recommendation to indies is start building an email mailing list. The problem with Steam and GOG and the various portals, they're fantastic outlets, but they're fantastic outlets for their clients. You have no capture of any of the details or way to tell or inform those people when you have a new project out. So,
and they can also change their policies tomorrow, and you would have no say in it at all.
Yeah, if Steam went away, we'd be absolutely screwed. I mean, at least we have a way to contact our core audience, but most people wouldn't. So I think it's quite important to try and capture at least some way. I mean, I think that a lot of that's moved to Discord now, where people join your Discord and you can tell them on your Discord. but that still pales in comparison to the amount of people that you can cap, because those are the hardcore fans who join your Discord.
Yeah.
The amount of people you can capture if you just get the email address. And every time we send out an email campaign, I can check from the analytics. From the analytics, I can see, even if I'm getting like a 5% or a 6% or a 10% click-through rate, it's still thousands of people who are visiting the page. So I think that would be sort of a bit of a thing. And then
my next thing that I do want to do, and we'll do it on the announcement of our project, is definitely try to incorporate more people into the actual, be very open about our development. Whether that means live Twitch streams, Patreon, those sorts of things, I don't know, but I definitely want to be quite open in how we're actually going forward, because I think that that's something that
that's the new way.
Then that's definitely the new way to actually go. Cool. I think the old way of relying on journalists to pick up your games and talk about them. I mean, I think it was Steam Summerfest, or not Steam Summerfest, the Games Fest, IGN Summer Games Fest, $250,000 for a 30-second spot on some of those things. We can't compete in those.
That's the budget of our game.
Yes, yeah. So we have to sort of try to find other ways to actually do it. Right now, I'm enjoying working on something that nobody knows about. But when we do announce it, I am going to look at various other avenues and opening up the development side.
The way of marketing has changed, because we've been doing this for, I know it's, I'd say 10 years. It doesn't sound like a long time, but it's like in game development, 10 years is forever.
Yeah.
Because we've been marketing and selling games, our own games for 10 years. The entire way that marketing has evolved it's changed totally. I mean, when Stasis came out, it was purely traditional media and websites and print magazines.
Yeah.
Pick up on the.
If you got a review on Rock Paper Shotgun, that was like it. That would like put you on the map.
Or one of the magazines. Stasis was in a whole lot of magazines, like traditional magazines. I mean, there was quite a different landscape. And then it moved all the way through to Twitter, and now it's just streamers. So and not even Twitch streamers, now it's YouTube streamers. They're the kingmakers on the marketing side.
And it can actually be quite difficult when you're making a single player narrative game that streamers will play, because a lot of the joy you get from playing the game is the story. And when you're watching somebody else play through the game, they are getting that thing. They're not necessarily going to go and buy the game. There's actually a thread currently on our Steam forum of somebody who said they watched Cayne play through the entire game. If they play the game, we'll have a different experience. And that is something that we've discussed a lot. And we just have to sort of hope that people will want to have that play experience for themselves, because we don't want to get into the games as a service kind of model. We want to be single player narrative focused games.
Yeah, I think story-based games are quite a hard sell, especially in the Twitch, YouTube environment, where people can watch the whole story play out. But hopefully they'll swing us a few dollars on discount and buy the game anyway. They like to, because obviously we just roll that money back into making another game. We're not doing anything else with it. But so the industry has vastly changed. So to answer your question, how do we market it? We just do everything we can. So I don't think that there's any single way. We are whores to the marketing industry. We try every outlet we can. We tell. I think it's important, and I think this is quite common knowledge, is that once you announce your game, you want to start that marketing at that point, at that dot. You don't want to announce your game if you don't have a Steam page. You need a Steam page because you need to capture those wish lists. You need to have a website that has an email contact so you can capture those emails. You need to have a Discord, and you need to post often. You can't just surprise people with a game. Sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't. Especially if you want to manipulate the Steam algorithm, where you get those initial boost of people on day one, that then pushes it up into the trending tabs, and then you get a lot of exposure on the Steam store. So you want to have a great launch, and to do that, you need a lot of people and a lot of momentum, which you could build through wish lists to start.
it's one of the things that I think is actually very powerful about Kickstarter specifically, is that when you launch your game, you immediately can have 2,000 people playing it, or at least redeeming the Steam keys, and that as you actually go through talking about it on social media. I think that's something that people don't really consider as the advantage of crowdfunding. But I think try to find ways to replicate having that initial people that have bought into the game that are now playing and talking about it. That's something that's sort of like probably the holy grail of trying to figure out how to actually do that.
Yeah.
As soon as we figure it out, we'll be billionaires and we'll let you know.
Okay. Anything else on the Stasis Bone Totem before we move to your new project, at least from what you can tell?
I think that Stasis Bone Totem, it was very well received. It's won a whole bunch of awards, especially from the community. We won a whole bunch of Best Adventure Games of the Year award from Adventure Games, which is like the premier website for adventure games. Stasis Bone Totem cleaned up in all the categories. People really respond to the characters. We've had lots of people. If you watch the Twitch streams and some of the YouTube plays, people cry when they play because we've built lovely characters that you really want to see succeed.
Yeah. Our goal has always been the emotional distraction of anybody who plays.
No, that's not true. We just want people to feel something when they play. Though we don't want it. It's not just Tetris that you kind of challenge with the pure analytical part of your brain. We really want people to feel something as they would a story. I don't think that modern day movies are really giving people that relief anymore, that kind of emotional roller coaster that people go on, where I think that video games do. So hopefully we can, give people a little story. And the thing that with our games, and a lot of people have said this, even if you go to Steam reviews, is that our games kind of linger with people. They kind of they put this little worm in their head and they kind of think about it a while after, and while they're lying there before they sleep, they kind of think about our game. So I think if we can achieve that, we'll be very happy. And I think with Bone Totem we did. So if anyone, I think check it out, pop us a message, join our Discord, let us know what you think about it.
Okay. Yeah, it stayed with me.
Yes.
Even though,
Mission accomplished, yes.
yeah. Okay. Maybe, are there any also overall development lessons from Stasis Bone Totem, if you need to like pin down some of the maybe like the complaints from the reviews or something that you could have done differently?
The negative side of lessons learned. I think the main one Chris will say would be the length. Yeah, bro.
Yeah. So something. So when we first wrote the game, the idea and how we planned it was to treat all three characters as one character going through a game. So the idea was that the game will probably be a couple of hours long. But as we sort of started to develop the characters and their stories, they very much became these three very, very separate narratives that they went on. And Stasis Bone Totem is essentially three games wrapped into one. And I think that did have a negative impact on the length of the game. People their play times vary from sort of like 8 hours up to some people in like the 20s to 30s. And I think that the length was probably a little bit too long, probably about 20-30% too long. I would have taken and edited it down a bit, not only for our sake in making the game, but also just for players as well.
I could have been a bit tighter on the story and cut out some of the fat on the story and made it even slicker.
Our purpose has generally been to provide a game that somebody can sit down with and in an evening and play it over 1 or 2 play sessions and leave it. I think if they go on for too long, you start to get frustrated. If it's too short, it becomes too forgettable. So we definitely we want to make something that's like an 8-hour sort of experience.
We want people to finish our games.
Yes.
So
it's you laugh, but it's a surprising thing. There's so many people that they'll play games, but they don't actually finish them. And I think our games have more impact when you get the entire story in one. So to create something that people can finish, is important.
So lesson learned was we don't have to make a extremely long game. You can make a shorter experience, and people will be okay with it. Some people won't. I mean, we got a negative review last week that we were chuckling about. It was
the game's only 10 hours long.
the guy said it was only 10 hours long, and then his other positive reviews were for like Master of Orion, like
450 hours of Masters of Orion. So I was like, okay,
we can't compete with that.
So I can understand why he didn't like our 10-hour experience.
I think it's like the mismanaged expectations a little bit.
Yeah. So I would say from the fact, keep it even. Gamers don't necessarily, we kind of think in our head, being like the old school gamers, that people want these games. I mean, we used to play games that used to take us months to finish before just the books. Yeah, but gamers, unless it's specific like the RPG genre and stuff, they expect and the simulator and the management games, those guys can load in tens of thousands of hours. But for adventure game stories, people don't expect the games to be these kind of epically long things that take a week of play sessions. They would be as satisfied with the game if it was,
or more satisfied
if it was a bit shorter. So, I mean, that's probably the case with like all movies and stuff these days. We just need to be able to trim some of that fat off. We don't need
movies don't have to be 2.5 hours long.
Yeah,
you can tell that story in 90 minutes. And I think that's but it can be very difficult because obviously, as you play your game, you don't know how long it's going to take somebody to do something because it's a puzzle game. So you sort of like, if you know the puzzles, I can speed run the game in 2 hours.
Oh yes, yeah.
That will take somebody 30 hours to do. So that just comes with like trying to feel it out. But we kind of, towards the end of production, I think we actually spoke about the fact that it's just a massive game.
It is a massive game.
It is a very...
So people are getting their money's worth. So yeah. I would say other things, we learned a lot from the technical side of things. The game's is super optimized. We learned a lot of Unity's loading systems, like the think of Unreal, pack level active. What do they call it? Asset bundles, loading and unloading asset bundles, that kind of all those lessons learned and stuff. But I think that the length was probably the biggest takeaway, the biggest thing that people had a problem with. Just the game was too long.
Yeah. So I think it's just to edit ourselves down a little bit more.
It seems like depending on the genre, there are different expectations, right?
Yes,
like,
sure. Yeah, expectations.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So, and let's mention because Stasis Bone Totem is available for like shit ton of platforms. So it's Steam, right? Steam Deck, Nintendo Switch, consoles.
Yes.
And
PS4 and Xbox.
Yes. And did I miss something? PC. Steam.
It is on GOG.
You said GOG. And it's also then it's also for sale on all of the key sites. So Green Man Gaming. There's so many of them. You can get it anywhere. If you just type in about Totem, you'll find it somewhere at a good price somewhere. So play it. Don't pirate it. Piracy is a whole other issue. We probably won't get into that, but it is an insanely pirated game. I think for every one copy sold, there's probably 10 pirates who are playing it. It is a bit disappointing when we have analytics in the game. We can tell when people are pirating. It is disappointing, especially when we get pirated from localized zones. So like we get a lot of Russian pirates.
I was gonna ask. So like, let's probably Eastern Europe, right? Russia.
Okay. We do have people. So there are people who pay for the game in those regions, and the people who pay for it have covered the translation costs. So we can't complain there. But our appeal to those people is that, like, if you pirate our games, because we're just two guys making these games, it cuts down on what we can do on the future game. So if you pirate it and you enjoy it, when it comes on discount somewhere, please buy it on discount. So at least we get a dollar or two, whatever the case may be, so that we can still pump
Yeah.
into the next game.
Yeah.
We're
As
not
As with sort of any small studio, we tend to run on a razor budget.
Yeah.
And literally every cent that we make for the game gets poured into the next game.
Yeah.
But I fully understand sort of like the economic reasons and the social reasons why people pirate games, but it's hard to not take it a little bit.
Yeah, I think if people get I think if you pirate to test it, although that's not really an excuse because people got a 2-hour test limit on Steam. But if you do pirate it and you do enjoy it, my appeal is just give something back to us. If you buy one of our old games or something that's $1, just give it back so that we can then roll it into the development.
Carry on making
specifically to support the languages, because the language translation is a massive chunk of change. It costs tens of thousands of dollars per language just to get them into the game, and those are upfront costs that we don't recoup for like a year into that language. So, and then languages that don't cover the recoup costs, we don't translate on the next game. So, but that being said, there are pirates who pirated in English as well. So I won't say. But so I just appeal to them to humanize us, that we are just two dudes who are trying to make very cool video games. And the truth is that no AAA studio or AA studio or whatever are ever going to make the kind of games that we make. So if you like the games that we make, you do need the support to carry on making them. No one's ever going to make a game like Bone Totem. It's ridiculously unprofitable for those guys. So if you want these kind of adventure games to be made, support the people that are making them.
Okay.
End of deal.
Okay, that's great. And so let's maybe close out with foreshadowing of the new project.
We've dropped some hints, some breadcrumbs.
I remember mentioning of Unreal, but that's about it.
Yeah. So Chris, all the cinematics in Bone Totem, all the cutscenes and that were all done in Unreal. So Chris learned Unreal over the course of the year. Like we said earlier, we've been in the architectural, the film, animation game for a long time. Since its inception, we've been using the software for like 30 years. Chris has been doing it in one way or another.
I've been using 3 Studio Max since DOS days.
Yeah, so 3 Studio Studio.
Yeah, when it was called 3 Studio
Kinetics. Yeah, through my dad's architectural firm. Anyway. And we were very impressed with Unreal. Unreal, the rendering capabilities are really on par with the tools that are available, like V-Ray and that sort of thing. And we were able to produce like 30 minutes of FMV for 40 minutes of FMV, which is like a small movie. I mean, literally in Unreal. So Chris learned. So when Unity, we started developing another isometric game. And Unity had that big fallout where they were going to start their nonsense with charging and whatever. And at the time, we were like umming and ahhing whether we should actually just use Unreal for the next game, because we were going to use it for the cinematics. We were like, okay, well let's just try and move all the development to Unreal. Unreal has its own costs involved as well. It has a huge cost to us because, like I said, our engine is 9 years old, and for us to produce another game was only going to be a 2-year cycle. Whereas now we've got to spend a year in R&D and develop all the new tools and stuff from scratch. And we were like, okay, maybe we could use Unreal. I mean, I don't know C++ at all. I would have to learn a new language. And
there's an entire new set of just skills that I would have to learn from going from pre-rendered 2D to real-time 3D.
The way that Unreal works is like a totally. It has similarities to Unity, but it's like it does things differently, and it's a lot of, especially when I've been using Unity for like over 10 years now. I've got to switch to another product where I think using Unity for 12 years actually. I looked at it, and to switch over to another product is a bit daunting. But anyway, we made the switch, and we've kind of moved over to Unreal for our next project. But we will, which is not going to be. I hope we're not making the same. We can always make another isometric game in the future, but we do need something a bit like very different, but still a narrative-based game, but in full 3D. one of the issues we had with telling a story in isometric is it's quite difficult to emote, to convey emotion, and that when you kind of really disconnected from the character. So
there's a lot of narrative tricks that you have to do to get that thing that just comes very naturally with a full 3D first person immersive environment.
Yeah, so we're going to try a hand at that and see what we can come up with. We've already got a really cool idea that we're working on, and we've roped in Jack, as we said earlier, who wrote a lot of Totem with us, and he's excited about the story as well. It's something totally weird and different, just in our kind of our wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But it won't be the traditional point and click. But that being said, we can always go back to that if this doesn't work out. So, but I think it will. I think people are going to respond well to this. It's going to be an interesting story to tell.
That's been the very nice, the amazing opportunity that Bone Totem has given us. Is it's given us room to explore other genres or other ways to actually tell the stories that we want to actually tell. And that's, of course, just down to the incredible support that we've actually gotten from the people who've supported us and bought the game and spoken about it, and the amazing streamers who streamed it, and reviewers who reviewed it, and that they've really given us a nice solid foundation that we can branch out a little bit.
Yeah, we've got a little bit more extra money that we can afford to spend an extra year trying to get this other game sorted out and seeing if it is fun.
Hopefully a grand experiment that will pay off.
Okay. So I'm getting that as a player, I would be much closer to all the stuff happening.
Yeah, so it's the
less
same kind of,
top down.
So same kind of game. So narrative heavy, puzzle adventure game, but just from a first person point of view. So not from the isometric point of view.
Okay.
I think, and also just beautiful graphics and stuff. So because Unreal is just an incredible engine. We've spent like 6 months now still in the R&D trying to, because the thing about adventure gamers is they might not have, they're not, people who traditionally play our kind of games aren't people with cutting edge computers. So we've kept a lot of that in mind in building this game and building out sort of the initial tech and stuff for it, in that we wanted to be able to play on slightly older computers. They don't have to have the fanciest card to play it, and it will still look good.
I'm not a tech artist, but in the last 6 months, I've very much had to become a tech artist, and I don't understand like how the shader systems are actually working and how to optimize it. Like Unreal's incredible, but out of the box, if you're just using SF, it's extremely unoptimized. Yeah, so you have to go in, and we are literally building everything from the ground up. Because I tried a thing where I took some assets and threw it together, and it looked beautiful. It chugged along at 20 frames a second on our test machine, and I was like, well, that's not going to actually work. So literally spending time trying to actually figure out the best way to do it, and also trying to build tools that will let us keep the graphical fidelity that we're known for, but not have to bring in 30 artists to actually get to that level.
The level stuff that we're doing that's really cool. Again, just kind of using that. We've got someone who's actually doing a lot of the level layout for us, and so we're using various tools that they're using CAD applications, and then we're bringing that into Unreal, and we're kind of working out how to quickly turn that into Unreal levels and stuff like that. So it's a lot of R&D at the moment.
There'll be a lot of in the next podcast that we do, we'll be able to go into all of that cool detail. There's a lot of really fun stuff that we're actually doing that I'm looking forward to being able to talk about, but also kind of enjoying the fact that we don't have to talk about it.
Okay, great. I think that's the best place to end, right?
Cool.
Thank you so much for the discussion.
Thank you.
It was great. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Lovely.